Welcome to another night at NightSleepWhisper. Today, I have a very special and long story for you. This mysterious journey, spanning 50 chapters, will accompany you until you fall fast asleep. Turn off the lights, adjust your pillow, and lean back. Let this adventure, which begins in Arthur's antique shop, carry you to the deepest corners of your dreams. Now, our story begins. Arthur was a quiet man. He lived in a small town. For many years, he was a history teacher. Now, he was retired. He did not like to sit still. He loved old objects because they had stories. He had a small shop for old furniture. He spent his days fixing chairs and polishing tables. One Tuesday morning, Arthur went to a large auction in the city. The room was big and cold. Many people were there. They sat on uncomfortable chairs and looked at a stage. A man stood at the front. He was the auctioneer. He spoke very fast. Arthur looked at his paper. He was waiting for item number 42. Finally, two strong men moved a large object onto the stage. It was a Victorian desk. The wood was dark and rich. It had beautiful carvings of leaves and vines on the legs. The top was covered in old green leather. Arthur felt a strange excitement. He wanted this desk. He felt that it belonged in his shop. "We start at $500, the auctioneer said. Someone in the front raised a hand. 600. Arthur raised his hand. 700, he said clearly. His heart beat fast. He did not usually spend a lot of money. But this desk was special. He felt a connection to it. 800, a man in a grey suit shouted. Arthur did not look at the man. He looked only at the desk. 900, Arthur said. The room became quiet. The man in the grey suit shook his head. He did not want to pay more. "Going once, going twice," the auctioneer said. He hit his small wooden hammer against the table. The sharp sound echoed in the quiet room. "Sold to the gentleman in the back." Arthur smiled. He paid for the desk with his savings. Later that afternoon, a truck delivered the heavy furniture to his shop. The shop was small and smelled like old wood and wax. Arthur put the desk in the center of the room. He touched the dark wood. It felt cool and smooth. He looked at the drawers. There were 6 drawers in total. 3 were on the left, and 3 were on the right. They had brass handles. The brass was dark with age. Arthur took a soft cloth and a bottle of oil. He started to clean the dust away. He worked slowly. He wanted to see every detail. As the sun went down, the shop became dark. Arthur turned on a small lamp. The yellow light made the desk glow. He opened the first drawer. It was empty. He opened the second and the third. They were also empty. But when he reached for the bottom drawer on the right, it did not move. It was stuck. Arthur pulled harder. The drawer stayed closed. He frowned. He was an expert with furniture. He knew when a drawer was broken or swollen from the rain. This drawer did not feel broken. It felt like something was holding it from the inside. He sat on the floor and looked under the desk. He did not see anything strange. He decided to wait until the morning. He was tired, but he was also very curious. This was not a normal desk. Arthur did not sleep well that night. He thought about the Victorian desk. He thought about the stuck drawer. In his dreams, the desk was a tall mountain, and he was trying to climb it. He woke up early, before the sun was high in the sky. He made a cup of hot coffee and went straight to his shop. The shop was quiet. The smell of old wood was strong and pleasant. Arthur turned on the big lights. He went to the desk and sat on his small wooden stool. He looked at the bottom right drawer again. He tried to pull it gently. It did not move. He tried to pull it hard. It still did not move. Arthur was a patient man. He knew that force was not the answer for old furniture. He took a small flashlight from his toolbox. He laid on his side on the floor. He shined the light into the small gaps between the drawers. He looked for a reason. Was there a piece of wood in the way? Was there old glue? He noticed something strange. At the very back of the desk, behind the drawers, there was a small piece of wood that looked different. It was a tiny square. It was hidden behind a decorative carving. Arthur reached his hand inside the desk. He had to stretch his arm. His fingers touched the small square of wood. He pushed it. Nothing happened. He tried to pull it. Nothing happened. Then, he tried to slide it to the left. The small square moved. A soft, mechanical sound came from inside the desk. It was the sound of a spring moving after many years. Arthur stood up. He reached for the bottom drawer. This time, it opened easily. It slid out like it was on ice. Arthur smiled. But when he looked inside the drawer, he was surprised. The drawer was empty. That is impossible. Arthur whispered to himself. Why was it locked if it is empty? He took the drawer completely out of the desk. He set it on his work table. He looked at the bottom of the drawer. Then he looked at the space where the drawer lived inside the desk. He put his hand into the dark hole. His fingers felt a small bump on the floor of the desk. He pressed the bump. Suddenly, a very small piece of the wood floor popped up. It was a secret compartment. It was only 5 centimeters wide and 10 centimeters long. Inside the compartment, there was something wrapped in a piece of old, purple silk. Arthur's hands shook a little bit. He carefully lifted the purple silk. He unwrapped it on the green leather top of the desk. Inside the silk was a key. It was not a normal key. It was made of heavy, bright gold. The top of the key was shaped like a small bird with its wings open. Arthur held the key up to the light. It was beautiful. It was very old, but it did not have any rust. It was clean and shiny. He wondered what a gold key like this could open. It was too small for a house door. Maybe it was for a jewelry box. Or a diary. He sat in the quiet shop and looked at the gold bird. He felt that his life was about to change. He was a history teacher, and he knew that objects like this usually carried secrets. He looked at the desk again. Who owned this before? Why did they hide the key so carefully? Arthur decided that he needed to find the answers. The next morning was very grey. A thick fog covered the street outside the shop. Arthur could not see the houses across the road. The air was cold and damp. He opened his shop early and turned on the lights. He put the gold bird key into his trousers pocket. It felt heavy and cold against his leg. He wanted to keep it safe and close to him. Arthur began his daily work. He was busy polishing an old wooden chair when the front door opened. A man entered the shop. He was tall and thin. He wore a long grey coat and a dark hat. His eyes were small and very sharp. He did not smile. He looked around the room slowly. "Good morning," Arthur said politely. The man did not say good morning. He walked straight to the Victorian desk in the center of the room. He looked at it for a long time. He touched the dark wood with his long fingers. He looked at the drawers and the brass handles. Arthur watched him carefully. He felt a little bit nervous. "I saw you at the auction yesterday," the man said. His voice was low and serious. Arthur stopped cleaning the chair. "Yes, I was there. It was a busy auction." "You bought this desk?" the man said. He did not look at Arthur. He only looked at the wood. "I wanted to buy it, but I arrived too late. I want to buy it from you now. I will give you more money than you paid." Arthur shook his head. "I am sorry, but it is not for sale. I am a collector. I want to study it first." The man moved closer to Arthur. He was much taller than Arthur. "Did you open the drawers?" the man asked. "Did you find anything interesting inside the wood?" Arthur felt a small spark of fear in his chest. He remembered the secret compartment and the gold key in his pocket. He did not want to tell this stranger about his discovery. "No," Arthur said. He tried to keep his voice steady. "The drawers were empty. There was only some old dust. Why do you ask?" The man did not answer the question. His eyes moved to the bottom right drawer. Arthur noticed the man's eyes stay on that specific spot for a second too long. This desk belonged to a very old family. The man said, "It has a long history. Sometimes, old things are dangerous for people who do not understand them." Arthur tried to sound brave. "I am a history teacher. I understand history very well. I am not afraid of an old desk." The man took a small white card from his pocket. He put it on the green leather top of the desk. "My name is Silas. If you change your mind, call me. Do not wait too long. Arthur." The man turned around and walked out of the shop. He moved silently through the door. Arthur went to the window. Through the thick fog, he saw the man across the street. Silas did not walk away. He stood under a street lamp and looked at the shop. He stayed there for a long time. Arthur felt a shiver. He went to the door and turned the lock. He was not alone anymore. Someone was watching him, and he knew the mystery was only beginning. Arthur sat in the quiet shop for a long time. He looked at the white card on the desk. The name Silas was printed in simple, black letters. There was no phone number and no address. Arthur felt that Silas was not a normal customer. He was a man with a dark purpose. Arthur looked at the door. It was locked, but he did not feel safe. He decided to look at the desk one more time. He wanted to know why Silas was so interested in it. He moved his desk lamp closer. The light was bright and yellow. He looked at the green leather top of the desk. He noticed something he did not see before. In the corner of the leather, there was a tiny gap. The leather was not glued down perfectly in that one spot. Arthur took a thin metal tool from his workbench. He was very careful. He did not want to hurt the old wood. He put the tool under the edge of the leather. He lifted it very slowly. The leather made a soft, stretching sound as it moved away from the wood. Under the leather, there was a flat space. It was a very thin, hidden area. Arthur saw a piece of yellow paper. It was folded many times. It looked very old and very fragile. He used his fingers to pull it out. He laid the paper on the top of the desk and opened it slowly. He did not want the paper to break. It was a hand-drawn map. The map was not of a city. It showed a coastline with many small islands. There were drawings of waves and a large lighthouse on a hill. In the middle of the map, there was a town. The handwriting was old and elegant. At the top of the paper, Arthur read the name of the place. Brightwood Bay. Arthur felt a chill. He had heard that name before. Brightwood Bay was a small town far to the north. It was a place with many tall cliffs and cold water. People said it was a lonely town with many old stories about lost ships. On the map, there was a red X near the lighthouse. Next to the X, there were some numbers and a small drawing. Arthur looked closer. The drawing was a small bird with its wings open. It looked exactly like the top of the gold key in his pocket. This key opened something in Brightwood Bay. Arthur whispered. He looked at the map again. He saw a drawing of a large building near the water. Under the building, the writer had listed a name. The Sea View Hotel. Arthur felt a mix of fear and excitement. He was a retired teacher, and his life was usually very quiet. But now, he had a mystery in his hands. He had a gold key, a map, and a strange man named Silas following him. He knew he could not stay in his shop. Silas might come back at night. Silas might try to take the desk or the key. Arthur made a quick decision. He went to his small apartment above the shop. He packed a small suitcase with some warm clothes, his flashlight, and his camera. He put the map and the gold key into a thick envelope. He looked out the window. The fog was still there, but Silas was gone. Arthur went to his car in the back of the shop. He drove away quietly. He did not turn on his lights until he was 2 blocks away. He was going to Brightwood Bay. He wanted to find the truth before Silas found him. The drive to Brightwood Bay was long and tiring. Arthur drove for many hours. The bright lights of the city disappeared. Soon, there were only tall trees and dark fields. The road was narrow and full of turns. Arthur felt very small in his little car. The engine made a low, steady sound as it worked hard. As the sun began to rise, the landscape changed. The trees became shorter and thinner. Arthur smelled the salty air of the ocean. He reached the top of a high cliff and looked down. Below him was a small, grey town. It was nestled between the dark water and the steep hills. This was Brightwood Bay. The town looked like it belonged to another time. The houses were made of stone and wood. Many of them had small gardens with blue and white flowers. The streets were made of old bricks. There were no bright signs or tall offices here. It was a place for secrets. Arthur drove slowly into the center of the town. He looked for the building from his map. He saw a bakery, a small post office, and a shop that sold fishing nets. Then, he saw it. On a hill overlooking the harbor stood a very large building. It had 4 floors and many white windows. A large wooden sign hung above the entrance. It said, "The Sea View Hotel." The hotel looked very old. The white paint was peeling in some places because of the wind and the salt from the sea. Arthur parked his car. He felt a little bit nervous. He took the envelope from his bag and looked at the map one more time. The red X was very close to this building. He noticed something new on the map. Under the name of the hotel, there was a tiny sentence written in very small letters. He had not seen it in the dim light of his shop. He moved the map closer to his eyes. The sentence said, "The truth is hidden where the sun hits the floor at noon." Arthur looked at his watch. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. He had 2 hours until noon. He did not know what the sentence meant, but it was his first real clue. He needed to get inside the hotel. He walked up the stone steps to the front door. The air was very cold. He heard the sound of the ocean waves hitting the rocks below. It was a rhythmic, heavy sound. He pushed the heavy wooden door open. Inside, the hotel was warm and smelled like lavender and old carpets. The lobby was large and grand. There was a big fireplace with a small fire burning inside. The floor was made of dark, polished wood. Arthur looked at the floor. He wondered where the sun would hit at noon. He walked to the reception desk. A small bell sat on the counter. He did not ring it. He waited quietly. He felt like he was a character in one of the history books he used to teach. He was no longer just a teacher. He was an investigator. Arthur stood at the reception desk. He waited for a moment. Then, he reached out and pressed the small metal bell. A sharp, clear sound echoed through the quiet lobby. A door behind the desk opened, and a man walked out. The man was tall and thin. He looked about 60 years old. He had white hair that was combed very neatly. He wore a dark blue suit that looked a bit too big for him. On his chest, there was a small gold name tag. It said, "Mr. Henderson, Manager, good morning." The man said. His voice was very formal and dry. "Welcome to the Sea View Hotel. How can I help you?" "I would like a room, please," Arthur said. "For a few nights." Mr. Henderson looked at Arthur's small suitcase. He looked at Arthur's tired face. Then, he opened a large, heavy book on the desk. He turned the pages slowly. The paper made a soft, scratching sound. "We are not very busy this week," Mr. Henderson said. "The weather is turning cold. Most people stay away from the bay during the storms. I can give you a nice room on the 3rd floor. It has a view of the water." "That sounds perfect," Arthur replied. He took out his wallet to pay. "The hotel is very beautiful. Has it been here for a long time?" Mr. Henderson stopped writing. He looked at Arthur with his cold, blue eyes. "It has been here for over 100 years. My family has managed it for 3 generations. It has many stories. Mr. Oh, Arthur. Just Arthur," he answered. He did not want to give his full name yet. "Well, Mr. Arthur, here is your key." Mr. Henderson placed a heavy brass key on the counter. It had a wooden tag with the number 303. "The stairs are to your left. We do not have an elevator. This is an old building, and we like to keep it traditional." Arthur took the key. He looked at the large windows in the lobby. The sun was getting higher in the sky. It was almost 11 o'clock. He had 1 hour left. "Is there a place where I can get some tea?" Arthur asked. He wanted a reason to stay in the lobby. "There is a small table by the window," Mr. Henderson said, pointing to the far corner. "I will bring a pot of tea for you. Please, sit down." Arthur walked to the table. From here, he could see the entire lobby. The floor was covered in large, square tiles of white and black marble. In the center of the room, there was a large rug with a pattern of anchors and ships. He sat down and waited. He watched the light move slowly across the floor. The sun was bright, and it created long, yellow rectangles on the dark wood and the marble. He felt his heart beating faster. He kept his hand in his pocket, touching the gold bird key. He wondered what would happen when the clock struck 12. Would the sun really show him the truth? The hotel lobby had large windows that faced the ocean. The sun was very bright now. Arthur sat at the small table near the corner. Mr. Henderson walked toward him. He carried a silver tray with a teapot and a small white cup. He placed the tray on the table. "Here is your tea," Mr. Henderson said. He did not smile. He looked at the floor and then walked back to the reception desk. Arthur poured the tea. It was hot and smelled like lemons. He watched the clock on the wall. It was a large, old clock made of dark wood. The hands of the clock moved slowly. The long hand moved with a heavy rhythm. It was 11:30 a.m. Suddenly, Arthur felt that someone was looking at him. He turned his head slowly. In a large, high-backed chair near the fireplace, a woman was sitting. She was wearing a long, bright red coat and a matching red hat. The color was very strong against the brown furniture of the lobby. She held a book in her hands, but she was not reading it. She was looking directly at Arthur. Her face was pale, and she had dark hair. She looked like she was about 40 years old. When Arthur looked at her, she did not look away. She stayed very still. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent. Arthur felt uncomfortable. Was she a guest? Or was she working with Silas? He remembered the man in the grey coat from his shop. Maybe Silas had friends in this town. Arthur looked down at his tea. He tried to act normal. He did not want her to know he was nervous. The woman in red stood up. Her coat moved like a flame in the dim light of the lobby. She walked slowly toward the window. She stood only a few feet away from Arthur. She looked out at the ocean and the grey sky. "The sea is very angry today," she said. Her voice was soft, but it was also very firm. Arthur looked up. Yes, the The waves are very big. It is a powerful sight. People come to Brightwood Bay for many reasons. The woman said. She turned her head and looked at Arthur again. Some people come to hide. Some people come to find things. Which one are you? Arthur did not know what to say. He held his cup tightly. I am just a tourist. I like old buildings and history. The woman smiled, but her eyes remained serious. This hotel is full of secrets. Arthur, you should be careful. Not everything that is hidden wants to be found. Sometimes, the past is better left alone. Arthur was shocked. His heart jumped. How do you know my name? I did not tell anyone my name. The woman did not answer. She did not even blink. She turned and walked toward the stairs. She moved quickly and quietly. In a moment, she was gone. Arthur looked at the clock. It was 11:55 a.m. The sun was now a bright, golden line on the floor. It was almost noon. He forgot about the woman for a moment and focused on the floor. The first clue was about to appear. The clock on the wall made a loud sound every second. It was finally noon. The sun was exactly above the hotel. A bright beam of light came through the high window. It hit a specific black marble tile in the center of the lobby. Arthur stood up and walked toward the light. He looked down at the tile. At first, he saw nothing. But then, as the light became stronger, he noticed a tiny scratch on the floor. It was not a mistake. It was a symbol. It was a small circle with a line through it. It looked like an old compass pointing north. Arthur quickly took out his notebook. He drew the symbol. He did not want to forget the location. Mr. Henderson was watching him from the desk. Arthur felt the man's cold eyes. He did not want to look suspicious. He picked up his suitcase and walked toward the stairs. I'm going to my room now, Arthur said to Mr. Henderson. Very well. Room 303 is on the third floor, at the end of the hall. The manager replied. Arthur climbed the stairs. The wood was old and felt heavy under his feet. The hallway was long and narrow. The wallpaper was dark green with gold flowers. It was very quiet. He found a door with the number 303. He put the brass key into the lock. The lock was stiff, but it turned. The room was small but clean. There was a large bed with a blue blanket. A wooden table stood by the window. Arthur walked to the window and looked out. He could see the beach and the old lighthouse on the hill. The waves were white and wild. He put his suitcase on the bed. He felt very tired from the long drive and the excitement. He sat down on a chair to rest. Then, he heard a sound. It came from the room next door. Room 302. It was the sound of heavy footsteps. Someone was walking back and forth. The floorboards in the next room made a loud, rhythmic sound. The person walked to the wall, then turned and walked back. It sounded like a heavy man. Arthur listened carefully. He did not hear any voices. Only the steady, heavy steps. Suddenly, the walking stopped. There was a loud sound of something hitting the floor. It sounded like a heavy metal box. Arthur felt a chill. Who was his neighbor? Was it Silas? Or was it someone else? He went to the wall and put his ear against the wood. He held his breath. For a long time, there was only silence. Then, he heard a low, raspy voice. It must be here. The voice said, the key must be here. Arthur pulled his head away from the wall. His heart was beating very fast. Someone else was looking for the key. He was not the only person with a secret. He looked at the gold bird key on the table. He needed to be very quiet. He was in a building full of strangers, and he was in danger. Arthur stayed in his room for a long time. He felt a deep sense of fear. He looked at the gold bird key on the table. He decided to hide it carefully. He put the key inside a small sock and placed it deep under his pillow. He needed to find more information. He could not just sit and wait in the dark. He opened his door very slowly. The hinges made a small, dry sound. He looked into the long hallway. It was empty. The yellow lights on the walls were very dim and made long shadows. He walked quietly toward the stairs. He wanted to go back to the lobby. Perhaps he could find the woman in red again. Near the door of room 302, he saw something small on the floor. It was a piece of white paper. It was torn and looked very old. Arthur looked at the door of room 302. He did not hear any footsteps or voices now. He bent down and picked up the paper quickly. He moved to a quiet corner near a large window at the end of the hall. The paper was part of a letter. The edges were rough and grey. The handwriting was slanted and messy. It was difficult to read. Arthur held the paper toward the window light. He could only see a few sentences. The lighthouse is the start. The gold belongs to the sea. Do not trust the manager. Arthur felt a cold shiver go down his back. Do not trust the manager. He whispered to himself. He thought about Mr. Henderson. The man was very formal and cold. Was he a thief? Or was he something even worse? The letter also mentioned the lighthouse. Arthur looked out the window. The old lighthouse stood high on the dark cliff. It was white and tall. It looked like a silent guard watching the bay. The map from the desk also had an X near that lighthouse. Everything was connected. Suddenly, a door opened. Arthur jumped. A man was standing in the doorway of room 302. The man was not Silas. He was a very large man with a thick black beard and small, angry eyes. He wore a heavy brown sweater that smelled of old tobacco. "What are you doing there?" the man shouted. His voice was loud and rough. Arthur did not answer. He felt a wave of panic. He put the torn letter into his pocket quickly. He turned and ran down the stairs. His heart was pounding against his ribs. He did not look back to see if the man was following him. He reached the lobby and saw Mr. Henderson at the reception desk. The manager was watching him. His face was like a stone mask. He did not say a word, but his eyes followed Arthur across the room. Arthur walked out of the front door. The wind was strong and smelled of salt. He felt the weight of the secrets in his pockets. He had the gold key, the strange map, and now a dangerous warning. He was in the middle of a mystery that was much bigger than he thought. Arthur went back to his room. He walked quickly and kept his head down. He did not want to see Mr. Henderson or the man with the beard. He reached room 303 and went inside. He locked the door immediately. He even pushed a heavy wooden chair against the door. He felt a little safer now. The sun was going down. The sky was a dark purple color. Arthur did not turn on the main light. He used a small lamp on the table. He took the torn letter out of his pocket. He laid it next to the map. The lighthouse, the gold, the manager. Arthur said softly. He was confused. Who wrote this letter? Was it the woman in red? Or was it the man in room 302? Arthur looked at the map. The red X near the lighthouse was the most important thing. He decided that he had to go to the lighthouse tomorrow. He needed to see what was there. Suddenly, Arthur heard a very soft sound. It was the sound of paper sliding against the wood of the floor. He looked at the bottom of his door. A small, white piece of paper was moving into his room. Someone was outside in the hallway. Arthur stood up. He stayed very quiet. He did not move. He waited for a sound from the hallway. He heard a light footstep, and then there was only silence. The person was gone. Arthur walked to the door. He picked up the paper. It was a small, square note. The paper was clean and new. There was only one sentence on it. The letters were large and written in black ink. "Leave now." Arthur felt a wave of cold fear. This was not a friendly message. It was a threat. Someone knew he was there. Someone knew he was looking for something. He looked at the chair against the door. It did not feel strong enough now. He went to the window. Outside, the wind was blowing hard. The waves hit the shore. The lighthouse was dark. Its light was not moving. It looked like a giant stone ghost. Arthur thought about his shop. He thought about his quiet life as a teacher. He could leave now. He could take his suitcase, drive his car, and go home. He could forget about the gold bird key and the Victorian desk. But then, he looked at the gold key under his pillow. The gold was bright and beautiful. He thought about the history of the desk. He was a man who loved stories. He could not leave a story in the middle. He wanted to know the ending. "I am staying." Arthur whispered to the empty room. "I will find the truth." He did not sleep that night. He sat in the chair and watched the door. He held his flashlight in his hand. Every time the old hotel made a sound, he became very still. He waited for the morning sun. He knew that tomorrow would be a very dangerous day. Arthur sat in the dark for a long time. The clock on the wall showed it was midnight. He did not turn on the lights. He watched the world through his window. The moon was high, but the clouds were thick. The ocean looked like a giant, moving animal. Suddenly, Arthur saw a movement near the front of the hotel. A side door opened slowly. A person walked out. The person wore a long, dark coat and a hat. In the moonlight, the person looked like a moving shadow. The figure did not look back. It started to walk down the stone path toward the beach. Arthur felt a spark of curiosity. Was it the man with the beard? Or was it Mr. Henderson? He knew he should stay in his room where it was safe. But he could not. He needed to know where the shadow was going. Arthur put on his heavy coat and grabbed his flashlight. He did not turn the flashlight on yet. He left his room and walked down the stairs. The hotel was very quiet. The old wood of the stairs made a low, groaning sound. But Arthur moved as light as a cat. He reached the side door and stepped outside. The air was freezing. The wind blew loudly against his face. It smelled of salt and wet sand. Arthur saw the shadow far ahead on the beach. The person was walking toward the old lighthouse. Arthur followed. He stayed far behind. He walked on the grass so his shoes did not make a loud sound on the stones. The sand was wet and heavy. The ocean made a rhythmic, crashing sound as the waves hit the rocks. It was a powerful and scary sound. The shadow stopped near a large rock. Arthur hid behind a piece of an old wooden boat on the sand. He watched. The person took something out of a pocket. Suddenly, a bright light appeared. It was a signal. The person moved the light in a circle 3 times. Then, the light disappeared. Arthur waited for a response. A few seconds later, a light flashed from the top of the dark lighthouse. It was a short, yellow flash. Then, it happened again. Arthur's heart beat fast. The shadow on the beach was talking to someone in the lighthouse. This was not a normal walk. This was a secret meeting. Suddenly, the person on the beach turned around. Arthur stayed very still. He pressed his body against the cold wood of the old boat. The person started to walk back toward the hotel. Arthur realized the person was coming straight toward him. He had to hide better, or he would be found. He looked around, but there was only the open sand and the dark water. Arthur pushed his body deep into the wet sand under the old boat. He held his breath. The shadow walked closer. The sound of boots on the stones became louder. Each step felt like a hammer in Arthur's ears. The person passed just 2 meters away from him. In the dim moonlight, Arthur saw a flash of red under the dark coat. It was the woman from the lobby. She did not stop. She walked with a quick, steady rhythm back toward the Sea View Hotel. Arthur waited until she was gone. He waited until he could no longer hear her footsteps. Then, he crawled out from under the boat. His clothes were covered in sand and cold water. But he did not care. He looked up at the lighthouse. It stood on the high cliff like a giant stone soldier. The light at the top was not a rotating beam for ships. It was small and steady. As Arthur watched, the light flashed again. One long flash, then two short ones. It was a code. Arthur decided to climb the cliff. There was a narrow, winding path made of stone. The path was slippery because of the ocean spray. He moved slowly. He did not use his flashlight. He did not want the person in the lighthouse to see him. The wind was much stronger here. It pushed against him, trying to knock him off the path. When he reached the top, he stood in front of the lighthouse. The building was very tall and round. The white paint was falling off in large pieces. The door was made of heavy iron. It had a large, old lock. Arthur reached into his pocket and touched the gold bird key. Was this the door it opened? He looked at the lock. It was too big for his small gold key. He felt a moment of disappointment. But he noticed something else. Next to the door, there was a small metal box attached to the wall. It looked like a box for a telephone or a small light. Arthur reached out and touched the box. It was not locked. He opened the small door. Inside, there was a lens. It was a signaling lamp. This was where the flashes came from. The lamp was warm. Someone was here very recently. Suddenly, Arthur heard a heavy sound from inside the lighthouse. It was the sound of something sliding. It was like a heavy stone moving across the floor. He put his ear against the iron door. He heard a low humming sound. It was the sound of a machine or a motor. Then, the signaling lamp in the box turned on. It was so bright that Arthur had to close his eyes. The light flashed right in his face. He jumped back in surprise. He realized the person inside knew he was there. He was no longer a secret observer. He was a target. Arthur turned and looked at the dark path behind him. He had to decide quickly. Should he run back to the hotel, or should he try to find a way inside? The mystery was pulling him deeper into the darkness of Brightwood Bay. The light from the small box was very bright. Arthur covered his eyes with his hand. He felt a moment of pure panic. He wanted to run, but his legs felt heavy. He heard the heavy iron door of the lighthouse move. It made a long, slow sound like metal scraping against stone. A person stepped out of the darkness of the lighthouse. The yellow light of the signaling lamp hit the person's face. It was the woman in the red coat. She did not look angry. She looked tired and worried. "You are very persistent, Arthur," she said. Her voice was calm. The wind blew her dark hair across her face. "Who are you?" Arthur asked. He tried to make his voice sound strong. "Why are you following me? And why are you signaling from this lighthouse?" The woman turned off the signaling lamp. The world became dark again, except for the pale light of the moon. "My name is Clara," she said. "And I am not following you. We are both looking for the same thing." Arthur did not move. He kept his hand near his pocket where the gold key was hidden. "I am just a tourist," he said. Clara laughed softly. It was a sad sound. A tourist does not buy a Victorian desk with a secret compartment. A tourist does not drive 5 hours to a lonely bay in the middle of a storm. "You have the key, Arthur." "I know you do." Arthur felt his heart skip a beat. "How do you know about the desk?" "Because it belonged to my family," Clara said. She walked closer to him. Arthur could smell the salt on her coat. My grandfather was a sailor. He lived in Brightwood Bay. He owned that desk many years ago. When he died, the desk was lost. I have been looking for it for a long time. Arthur looked at her eyes. She did not look like the man Silas. She did not look like a criminal. She looked like someone who was missing a piece of her history. What is the key for? Arthur asked. Clara looked at the dark ocean. My grandfather had a secret. He said that a great treasure was lost in this bay 100 years ago. He found part of it. He hid the location inside that desk. But he also knew that dangerous people were watching him. People like Mr. Henderson. Arthur asked. Clara nodded. The Henderson family has lived in that hotel for a long time. They want the gold. They think it belongs to them. We are in danger here. Arthur, we cannot talk in the open. The wind has ears in this town. She looked at the hotel in the distance. The lights were still on. Go back to the hotel. Act normal. Tomorrow morning, meet me at the town library. I have something to show you. Before Arthur could say anything else, Clara turned and walked back into the lighthouse. The iron door closed with a heavy sound. Arthur was alone on the cliff again. He had a name now. Clara. He had a partner, but he did not know if he could trust her. The next morning, the sun was hidden behind thick, grey clouds. Arthur woke up early. He felt stiff from his long night on the cliff. He checked under his pillow. The gold bird key was still there. He put it in his pocket and went down to the lobby. Mr. Henderson was standing behind the reception desk. He was polishing a silver bell. He looked up as Arthur passed. Leaving so early? Mr. Arthur? He asked. His voice was cold and smooth. I'm going for a walk. Arthur replied. I want to see the town. Be careful. Henderson said. The streets in Brightwood Bay are old and narrow. It is easy to get lost. Arthur walked out of the hotel. He followed the main road down the hill. He found the town library near the post office. It was a small building made of grey stone. It had tall windows and a heavy wooden door. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of old paper and dust. He found Clara in a quiet corner at the back of the library. She was sitting at a large oak table. There were many old books and maps in front of her. She looked up and pointed to a chair. Thank you for coming. Clara said softly. She looked tired. I did not sleep much last night. You said your grandfather owned the desk. Arthur said as he sat down. Tell me everything. Clara opened a folder. She took out an old photograph. It showed a tall man with a kind face. He was standing on a boat. This was my grandfather, Captain Elias. He was a brave man. 60 years ago, a ship called the Golden Star sank near the bay during a terrible storm. It was carrying a lot of gold from a distant land. Arthur leaned forward. Did he find the ship? He found part of it. Clara explained. But he was not a greedy man. He knew the gold brought trouble. He saw how people in this town changed when they heard about the treasure. They became angry and dangerous. So, he decided to hide the location. He built that Victorian desk himself. He was a master woodworker. Arthur thought about the beautiful carvings on the desk. He hid the map under the leather top. Arthur said. Clara nodded. Yes. But the map is only half of the secret. To find the exact spot, you need two things. You need the gold bird key to open the chest, and you need a special watch to find the time of the tide. My grandfather divided the secrets. He sold the desk to a man far away to keep it safe. He hoped that one day, someone honest would find it. Why did you wait until now to look for it? Arthur asked. I finally found his old journal. She whispered. It said that the guardian of the bay would try to steal the gold. That is the Henderson family. They have been looking for this treasure for 3 generations. They think it belongs to the hotel. Arthur felt the weight of the key in his pocket. He realized he was now part of a long, dangerous history. He was not just a teacher anymore. He was the protector of a captain's secret. Arthur looked at the old photograph of Captain Elias. He felt a deep respect for the man. The library was very quiet. Only the sound of a distant clock moved through the air. Clara reached into her small leather bag. She moved slowly, as if she were handling something very fragile. You have the gold key, Clara said. It was not a question. My grandfather called it the key of the sky. It has the bird with open wings. It represents the wind and the direction. Arthur reached into his pocket. He pulled out the gold bird key and placed it on the wooden table. The gold metal caught the light from the library window. It looked beautiful and important. I have the other half, Clara whispered. She placed a second key on the table next to Arthur's. This key was made of bright, polished silver. It was the same size and shape as the gold one, but the top was different. Instead of a bird with open wings, the silver key had a bird with its wings closed. The bird looked like it was resting or sleeping. The key of the sea, Clara explained. My grandfather said that one key is useless without the other. You need the gold to find the path, and you need the silver to open the door. They are 2 parts of one heart. Arthur picked up the silver key. It felt colder than the gold one. He looked at the 2 keys together. They were like a puzzle. Where did you find this? He asked. It was hidden inside an old clock in my mother's house, Clara said. My grandfather was very clever. He knew that if a thief found one key, they would still need the other. He divided the keys between the furniture and the family. Arthur felt a sense of wonder. He was an expert on old things. But this was more than just a hobby now. This was a real adventure. He looked at the map in his mind. The map shows the Sea View Hotel and the lighthouse. But where is the chest? Where do these keys go? Clara leaned closer. Her voice was very low. The journal says the chest is not on the land. It is hidden where the earth meets the ocean. But we cannot go there yet. We need to find the third object. The silver watch, Arthur said. He remembered the outline of the story in his mind. Clara nodded. Yes. The watch tells us the exact time of the tide. Without the watch, the cave is underwater. If we go at the wrong time, we will drown. The watch is the most difficult piece to find. My grandfather's notes say it is still inside the hotel. Arthur thought about his room. He thought about the heavy footsteps in room 302 and the cold eyes of Mr. Henderson. The hotel was no longer a place to sleep. It was a giant puzzle box, and they were inside it. We must be careful, Arthur said. The man in the grey coat, Silas, might be working for Henderson. They are watching the hotel. We are not safe there. Clara put the silver key back in her bag. I know, but we have no choice. The secret is in the hotel, and we must find it before they do. The library was very quiet. The only sound was the ticking of a clock on the wall. Arthur and Clara walked to the section for local history. There were many tall shelves filled with large, dusty books. The air felt heavy and smelled like old paper. Arthur loved this smell. It reminded him of his years as a teacher. We need to find the original plans of the hotel, Clara whispered. My grandfather said the hotel changed many times. New rooms were added, and old rooms were hidden. Arthur looked at the labels on the books. He found a thick book with a blue cover. The title was The History of Brightwood Bay, 1880 to 1950. He took it off the shelf and carried it to the table. He opened it carefully. The pages were yellow and thin. They looked at the photographs in the book. There were pictures of the harbor, the lighthouse, and the Sea View Hotel. The hotel looked different in the old photos. It was smaller. It did not have the large side wing where Arthur's room was located. "Look at this," Arthur said. He pointed to a photo from 1920. "There is a small door on the ground floor that is not there now. It is covered by a large painting of a ship today." Clara leaned in close. "You are right. That door leads to the basement. But Mr. Henderson said the basement is only for the heating pipes. He told me it was a boring and dirty place." Arthur turned more pages. He found a list of the people who worked at the hotel. He saw the name Henderson many times. He also saw a name that made him stop. Silas Vane. Night porter. 1935. Silas. Arthur whispered. "The man from my shop. He has the same name. Is he related to this porter?" "It is possible," Clara said. "Secrets stay in families for a long time in this town. If his grandfather was the porter, he might know about the hidden rooms too." They continued to search. Arthur found an old newspaper article from 1945. The headline said, "Captain Elias donates Victorian desk to charity." The article explained that the captain wanted the desk to go to someone far away. He said the desk held a heavy weight that the town was not ready for. He was trying to protect the secret. Arthur said. He sent the desk away so the Hendersons could not find it. And now, the desk is back in the bay. The story is coming to an end. Suddenly, the front door of the library opened. A cold wind blew into the room. Arthur and Clara looked up. A man in a long coat entered. He did not look at the books. He looked directly at Arthur and Clara. It was not Silas, but it was someone Arthur recognized. It was the man with the black beard from room 302. He looked angry and suspicious. Arthur closed the book quickly. He felt his heart begin to race. They were being followed again. The library was no longer a safe place to talk. Arthur and Clara stayed very still. The man with the black beard walked slowly toward the science section. He did not pick up a book. He kept his eyes on Arthur. Clara lowered her head and whispered, "Do not look at him. Look at the book." Arthur turned the pages of the history book again. He was looking for page 142. The index said that this page had the map of the hotel's foundations from the 1920s. He turned from page 141. He expected to see the map. Instead, he saw a thin, jagged line of paper near the spine of the book. "It is gone," Arthur whispered. Someone tore the page out. Clara touched the edge of the paper. It was a fresh tear. The edge was white, not yellow like the rest of the book. "Someone was here recently," she said. "Someone who does not want us to see the layout of the basement." The man with the black beard was now only 2 tables away. He pulled out a chair. He sat down and stared at them. He did not have a book or a newspaper. He just watched them with his small, dark eyes. Arthur felt a cold sweat on his forehead. "We need to go," he said to Clara. "We cannot talk here. It is too open." Clara closed the heavy book. She stood up and walked to the front desk to return it. Arthur followed her. He could feel the man's eyes on his back like a physical weight. They walked out of the library and into the cold air. The wind was even stronger now, blowing sand from the beach into the streets. "That man is staying in room 302, Arthur said. "He is right next to me. He must be working for Mr. Henderson." "Or he is working for himself," Clara said. She looked at the grey waves in the harbor. "There are many people who want the gold, Arthur." It is not just a family secret anymore. It is a race. And someone is winning because they have that map. They walked toward the harbor. Arthur thought about the missing page. If the page was gone, it meant the secret door was real. Someone already knew exactly where it was. I need to go back to the hotel, Arthur said. I need to look at that painting in the lobby. If the door is behind it, I must find a way to open it tonight. Clara looked worried. It is dangerous. Henderson is always at the desk. He sees everything. But I have an idea. I will go to the hotel restaurant at dinner time and start a conversation with him. I will ask him many questions about the hotel's history. While he is busy with me, you can look for the door. Arthur nodded. It was a risky plan, but they did not have much time. The mystery was becoming a hunt, and they were the ones being hunted. Arthur and Clara were at the library door, but Arthur stopped. He looked at the empty space in the book again. Wait, he whispered. The librarian keeps a record of who uses these books. If we find the name of the last person, we find our thief. Clara nodded. They did not leave. Instead, they walked deeper into the library. They went toward the stacks. The stacks were long rows of very tall shelves in the back of the building. This area was dark and smelled of dust. There were no windows here. As they walked between the high walls of books, Arthur heard a sound. It was the description of a slow, heavy footstep on the old wood floor. He stopped. Clara stopped, too. They stayed very quiet. In the distance, they heard the sound again. It was rhythmic. Is it the man with the beard? Clara whispered. Her voice was tiny. I do not know, Arthur replied. Stay behind me. They moved slowly through the stacks. The shadows were long and black. The light from the front of the library did not reach this far. Arthur felt like the books were watching them. Suddenly, a large shadow moved at the end of the hallway. A person was standing there, but it was too dark to see a face. The person did not speak. The shadow turned and walked behind a shelf. Arthur and Clara followed quietly. They reached the end of the row, but the hallway was empty. There was only another row of books. Suddenly, a book fell from a high shelf. It hit the floor with a loud, heavy impact. Arthur jumped. He looked up. He saw a hand moving near the top of the shelf. Someone was above them on a small metal ladder. Who is there? Arthur asked. His voice shook a little. There was no answer. Instead, the person on the ladder moved quickly. They heard the sound of metal sliding on the floor. The person jumped down and ran toward the back exit of the library. Arthur ran after the shadow. He turned the corner and saw the back door closing. He reached the door and pushed it open. He looked out into the narrow alleyway behind the library. The rain was starting to fall. He saw a man in a long, grey coat disappearing around the corner. It was Silas, Arthur said. He was breathing hard. The man from the city. He is here in Brightwood Bay. Clara came to the door. She looked worried. If Silas is here, then the situation is very bad. He is a professional. He does not make mistakes. Arthur looked down at the ground. Near the door, he saw a small piece of paper. It was the missing page from the history book. Silas must have dropped it when he ran. Arthur picked it up. He looked at the map on the page. It showed the basement of the Sea View Hotel. We have the map now, Arthur said. But Silas knows we have it. We are not safe in the streets anymore. We must get back to the hotel and find that secret door before he finds us again. The rain was falling hard when Arthur and Clara reached the Sea View Hotel. The sky was almost black now. The wind moved the old wooden sign above the door, and it made a slow, crying sound. Arthur held the missing page from the history book tightly in his pocket. He felt like he was carrying a piece of gold. They walked into the lobby. Mr. Henderson was not at the desk. The room was empty and quiet. The fire in the fireplace was small and dying. Arthur felt a sense of relief, but it did not last long. He saw a small white light flashing on the hotel's telephone system behind the desk. "Mr. Arthur." A voice called out. Mr. Henderson walked out from the back office. He was holding a small piece of paper. He did not look angry. He looked curious. "You had a phone call. A man named Mr. Miller called from your hometown. He said it was very important. He asked you to call him back immediately." Arthur felt his stomach drop. Mr. Miller was his neighbor. He looked after the shop when Arthur was away. Arthur took the paper with the phone number. "Thank you," he said. His voice was a whisper. He walked to the wooden phone booth in the corner of the lobby. He closed the glass door. He wanted privacy. He dialed the number and waited. The telephone made a rhythmic, clicking sound. Then, someone picked up. "Arthur. Is that you?" Mr. Miller sounded breathless and scared. "Yes, it is me. What happened?" "Arthur, I'm so sorry. Someone broke into your shop last night. They did not take the money from the register. They did not take the silver lamps or the jewelry. They only wanted the furniture." Arthur gripped the phone. "The Victorian desk. But I have it with me." "They were looking for it," Mr. Miller said. "They broke every other desk in the shop. They tore the leather off the tables. They even pulled up the floorboards. The police are here now. It is a total mess, Arthur. It looks like a war happened inside your shop." Arthur felt a wave of guilt. He thought about his beautiful, quiet shop. He thought about his books and his tools. Everything was destroyed because of the secret he was carrying. "Did they see anyone?" Arthur asked. "A witness saw a man in a grey coat," Mr. Miller replied. "He was tall and thin. He drove away in a black car before the police arrived." Arthur closed his eyes. Silas. While Silas was here in Brightwood Bay, he had people working for him back in the city. This was a large operation. It was not just one man looking for a story. It was a group of people who would stop at nothing. He hung up the phone and stepped out of the booth. Clara was waiting for him. She saw the look on his face. "What is it?" she asked. "They attacked my shop," Arthur said. He looked at the painting of the ship on the lobby wall. "They are trying to scare me. But it is too late. We have the map, and we have the keys. We are going into that basement tonight." The lobby was very quiet now. It was late in the evening. Most of the hotel guests were in their rooms. Mr. Henderson sat at the reception desk, reading a newspaper. Arthur and Clara sat by the fireplace. They did not talk. They waited for the manager to leave. Finally, at 11 o'clock, Mr. Henderson stood up. He yawned and put his newspaper away. He turned off some of the lights in the lobby. "I am going to my office," he said to Arthur. "Please make sure the front door is locked if you go out." "We will," Arthur replied. They waited until they heard the door of the office close. The lobby was now dim and full of long shadows. Arthur stood up and walked toward the large painting of the ship. It was a beautiful painting of a vessel in a storm. The waves in the painting looked real and dangerous. "The map shows the stairs are exactly here," Arthur whispered. He touched the heavy gold frame of the painting. It was very thick and dusty. He looked at the edges. He did not see any hinges or handles. He tried to push the painting to the left. It did not move. He tried to pull it. It stayed firmly on the wall. Clara came to help him. "Maybe it moves like the desk drawer," she suggested. "Try to find a secret button or a lever." Arthur ran his fingers along the bottom of the frame. He felt a small piece of metal. It was hidden behind a decorative leaf on the wood. He pressed it hard. A deep, mechanical sound came from inside the wall. It was the description of heavy weights moving. Slowly, the entire painting began to move. It did not pull away from the wall. Instead, it slid to the right. It moved behind the wallpaper like a sliding door. Behind the painting, there was a dark, narrow opening. Arthur turned on his flashlight. The beam of light cut through the darkness. He saw a set of very old stone stairs. The stairs went down into the ground. The air that came out of the hole was cold and smelled of wet earth and old salt. "This is it," Arthur said. His heart was beating fast. The secret staircase. It leads to the basement from the 1920s. "Wait," Clara said. She looked back at the lobby. "If we go down there, we might get trapped. We don't know if the painting closes from the inside." Arthur looked at the mechanism. There was a small metal handle on the inside of the wall. "We can open it from here. Come on. We don't have much time. Silas or Henderson could come back any minute." Arthur stepped into the dark opening. The stone steps were slippery and very steep. He held the wall with one hand and his flashlight with the other. Clara followed him closely. As soon as they were both inside, Arthur pulled the handle. The heavy painting slid back into place. They were now in total darkness, except for the small circle of light from the flashlight. They were under the hotel, in a place that had been hidden for many years. The mystery of the Golden Star was waiting for them at the bottom of the stairs. Arthur and Clara walked down the stone stairs. The air became colder with every step. Arthur held the flashlight tightly. The light moved across the walls. The walls were made of rough, grey stone. They were wet with water from the ground. Arthur could hear a low sound. It was the ocean. The waves were hitting the rocks outside the hotel. Here, under the ground, the sound was deep and heavy. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a long hallway. The floor was made of old wood. When Arthur stepped on it, a cloud of dust rose into the air. He coughed softly. Clara covered her face with a silk scarf. "Nobody has been here for many years," Clara whispered. Her voice sounded strange in the small space. They walked slowly. On both sides of the hallway, there were tall stacks of old crates. The crates were made of dark wood. Some were broken. Arthur shined his light on a large crate near the wall. He saw some letters painted in white. The paint was old and peeling. It said, "SV Hotel, 1924. "These are things from the old hotel," Arthur said. "Furniture, blankets, and kitchen tools. They hid them here when they built the new wing." He moved the flashlight to the next stack. These crates were different. They were smaller and stronger. They were tied with heavy metal chains. One crate had a symbol on it. Arthur leaned closer. It was a small gold star. "The Golden Star," Clara said. Her eyes were wide. "This must be the cargo from the ship. My grandfather did not hide the gold in the sea. He brought it here." Arthur felt a mix of excitement and fear. If the gold was here, then the Henderson family was living on top of a fortune. He looked at the map in his hand. The map showed a small room at the very end of this hallway. They continued walking. The hallway felt like it was getting narrower. The ceiling was low. Arthur had to bend his head. Suddenly, he saw something on the floor. It was a pair of modern boots. The footprints were fresh in the thick dust. Arthur stopped. He put his hand out to stop Clara. "Look," he whispered. The footprints went toward the end of the hallway. Someone was here recently. Someone knew about the secret staircase. Arthur turned off his flashlight. The darkness was total. It felt like a heavy blanket. They listened. For a minute, there was only the sound of the ocean. Then, they heard a different sound. It was the description of a metal key turning in a lock. It came from the room at the end of the hall. Someone was already there, trying to open the secret door. Arthur and Clara stood in the dark, their hearts beating fast. They were not alone in the basement. Arthur and Clara stood in the total darkness of the basement. They did not move. Arthur's heart felt like a drum in his chest. He listened to the sound of the metal key again. It was a sharp, scraping sound. Then, they heard a heavy door opening. It made a long, low noise against the stone floor. "We must see who it is," Clara whispered. Arthur turned his flashlight back on, but he kept the light low. He pointed it at the floor. They walked toward the end of the hallway. The footprints in the dust were very clear here. They reached a small wooden door. It was open just a few centimeters. Arthur pushed it slowly. The door did not make a sound because the hinges were covered in thick oil. They stepped into a small, square room. It was not a storage room. It looked like a private office from a long time ago. There was a small desk, a wooden chair, and a large iron safe in the corner. But in the middle of the room, on a low stone table, sat a heavy wooden chest. The chest was beautiful. It was made of dark oak wood and had thick bands of black iron around it. It looked very strong and very heavy. Arthur moved his light to the front of the chest. He saw two keyholes. They were side by side. Above the left keyhole, there was a carving of a bird with its wings open. Above the right keyhole, there was a carving of a bird with its wings closed. "This is it," Arthur said. "The keys from the desk and the clock." He looked around the room. The person who was here a moment ago was gone. There was another door on the opposite wall, and it was slightly open. A cold wind came through the gap. "Where did they go?" Clara asked, looking at the second door. "I do not know," Arthur replied. "But we are here now. We have the keys. We must open it before they come back." Arthur took the gold bird key from his pocket. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked at the bird with the open wings. He put the gold key into the left hole. It fit perfectly. He did not turn it yet. Clara took the silver key from her bag. She looked at the bird with the closed wings. She put the silver key into the right hole. "We must turn them at the same time," she said. "My grandfather's journal said the heart must beat as one." "On the count of 3, Arthur said. 1, 2, 3. They turned the keys together. There was a loud, heavy sound of metal moving inside the wood. It sounded like many small wheels turning at once. Then, there was a sharp sound of a lock opening. The heavy lid of the chest moved up a few millimeters. Arthur put his hands on the lid. It was very heavy. He pulled it open. He expected to see gold coins or sparkling jewels. But when the light of the flashlight hit the inside of the chest, he saw something else. Arthur and Clara stared into the heavy wooden chest. The light from the flashlight was bright against the dark wood. There were no gold coins. There were no bags of silver. Instead, the chest was filled with old, yellow papers and a small box covered in blue velvet. Arthur felt a moment of confusion. "Where is the treasure?" he whispered. He reached into the chest and picked up the blue velvet box. It was small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. It felt surprisingly heavy. He opened the box slowly. Inside, resting on a bed of white silk, was a beautiful silver watch. It was a pocket watch with a long silver chain. The metal was polished and bright. On the front of the watch, there was a carving of a lighthouse surrounded by wild waves. "This is the third object," Clara said. Her voice was full of wonder. "The silver watch of the Golden Star." Arthur took the watch out of the box. He pressed a small button on the top. The silver cover opened with a soft movement. The face of the watch was white with elegant black numbers. The hands of the watch were made of thin, dark metal. They were not moving. It stopped. Arthur noted. He looked closely at the dial. "The hands are at 10 and 3. It is exactly 10:15. Clara leaned in to look. My grandfather wrote about this. He said the time was the most important secret of all. This watch did not stop because it was broken. He stopped it on purpose. Why? Arthur asked. The sea cave. Clara explained. The entrance to the hidden beach is under the water for most of the day. The tide in Brightwood Bay is very dangerous. There is only 1 hour when the water is low enough to walk inside. My grandfather used this watch to mark that exact hour. Arthur looked at the frozen hands. So, at 10:15, the cave is open. No. Clara said, shaking her head. The tides change every day. This watch is a tool. There is a small wheel on the side. If you turn it to the current date, the hands move to show the safe time. It is a very clever machine. Arthur turned the watch over. On the back, there was a list of months and days carved into the silver. It was a manual for the ocean. He felt a deep respect for Captain Elias. The man was not just a sailor. He was a genius of logic and safety. Suddenly, Arthur heard a sound from the hallway. It was a soft, sliding sound, like a coat brushing against a stone wall. He froze. He turned off the flashlight immediately. The room became black. Someone is coming. He breathed into the dark. They stood perfectly still. In the silence, the sound of the ocean outside seemed louder. Then, they heard a footstep. It was heavy and slow. It was coming from the second door, the one that led deeper into the foundations of the hotel. Arthur gripped the silver watch tightly. They had the map, the keys, and now the watch. They had everything they needed. But they were trapped in a room with only one exit. The door opened slowly. A beam of white light cut through the darkness. Arthur and Clara moved back until they touched the cold stone table. A man stood in the doorway. It was Mr. Henderson. He was still wearing his dark blue suit. It was perfectly clean. He did not look like a man who was lost. He looked like a man who was in his own home. "What are you doing here?" he asked. His voice was like ice. "This area is off limits. It is very dangerous for guests." Arthur stood tall. He kept his hand over the pocket with the silver watch. "You told us the basement was only for heating pipes, Mr. Henderson," Arthur said. "You said it was a boring and dirty place. But look around. This is a private office. There are documents and a chest. This is not a room for pipes." Mr. Henderson walked into the room. He did not look at the stone walls or the ceiling. He looked directly at the open wooden chest. "I was protecting the hotel," Henderson said. "I found this hidden area only a few days ago. I was coming here tonight to lock the door and keep it safe. I did not want anyone to get hurt." Arthur noticed something. In Henderson's left hand, there was a heavy brass key. The key was old, but it was very clean. It did not have any rust or dust. "If you found this room by accident, how do you have the key for it?" Arthur asked. "And why is the key so clean?" "It looks like you use it every day." Henderson stopped walking. He looked at the key in his hand and then back at Arthur. He realized his mistake. He did not try to hide the key anymore. "You are more observant than you look, Mr. Arthur," he said. He did not sound like a polite manager now. His voice was low and dangerous. "You are lying," Clara said. Her voice was shaking, but she was brave. "My grandfather, Captain Elias, wrote about your family. He said the Hendersons wanted the Golden Star. You knew about this room. You have known about it for years. You just couldn't open the chest because you didn't have the keys." Henderson's face became a mask of anger. "This hotel has been in my family for 3 generations," he shouted. The sound of his voice hit the stone walls. "We worked for the captain. We served him. And he hid the gold from us. He had no right. Everything under this roof belongs to me." Arthur understood everything now. Henderson's kindness was a lie. The warnings to be careful were threats. Henderson was waiting for someone to find the keys and the map. He was waiting for Arthur to do the hard work for him. The gold belongs to the history of this town. Arthur said, "It does not belong to you. Give me the silver watch, Arthur." Henderson said. He took a heavy step forward. He was a large man, and he blocked the only door to the hallway. "You are deep under the ground. Nobody can hear you. Give me the watch, and I will let you leave this room." Arthur looked at Clara. They were trapped. Then, he looked at the second door behind the stone table. It was dark and narrow. He did not know where it went, but he knew they could not stay here. The air in the basement was heavy and thick. Mr. Henderson took another step forward. His shadow was long and thin against the wet stone walls. He held his hand out. "The watch, Arthur." He repeated, "Now." Arthur did not move. Suddenly, a deep sound moved through the floor. It was a low, rolling sound that made the dust dance on the wooden crates. It was thunder. Outside, the storm was finally hitting Brightwood Bay. "The storm is here," Arthur said. He looked at the ceiling. "The hotel is old. Do you really want to be down here when the rain comes?" As if to answer him, the lights in the basement flickered. They went from bright to dim, then back to bright. A second later, everything went black. The power was out. The hotel had lost its electricity. "Clara, now!" Arthur shouted. He did not go toward Henderson. Instead, he grabbed Clara's hand and ran toward the second door, the narrow one behind the stone table. He turned on his flashlight for just a second to see the path. The doorway was low and made of rough bricks. They pushed through it just as Henderson lunged for them. They were in a narrow tunnel. The walls were made of natural rock and earth. This was not part of the hotel's foundation. It was an old passage leading toward the cliffs. Arthur could hear Henderson behind them. The manager was shouting, and his heavy boots made a loud, splashing sound in the puddles on the floor. "Keep moving," Arthur urged. The tunnel was wet. Water was dripping from the ceiling. The sound of the rain outside was much louder here. It was a rhythmic, heavy drumming. Suddenly, the tunnel opened up. Arthur shined his light ahead. They were standing at the edge of a small, rocky opening. Outside, the world was a wall of grey water. The rain was falling so hard that Arthur could barely see the ocean. The wind was screaming. The waves were hitting the base of the cliffs with a sound like a loud gunshot. "We are outside," Clara cried. The wind blew her hair across her face. They were on a narrow ledge halfway down the cliff. Below them was the wild, white water of the bay. Above them was the hotel, dark and silent in the storm. There was no way back up, and the tunnel behind them was blocked by a very angry Mr. Henderson. Arthur looked at the silver watch in his hand. He pressed the button to open the cover. By the light of his flashlight, he saw the hands were still at 10:15. But the sky was dark, and the tide was coming in. They were trapped between a man who wanted to hurt them and a sea that wanted to swallow them. Arthur and Clara stood on the narrow ledge. The rain was cold and hard. It felt like small stones hitting their skin. Behind them, in the dark tunnel, they heard Henderson's heavy boots. The sound was getting closer. "We cannot stay here," Arthur whispered. The wind almost carried his voice away. "He will see us." He looked around the ledge. To the left, the cliff was smooth and dangerous. To the right, there was a small opening in the rock. It was covered by thick, dead vines. It looked like a small pocket in the stone. "In there," Arthur said. He pulled Clara toward the opening. They crawled into the small space. It was very tight. They had to sit close together. Arthur turned off his flashlight. The darkness was thick. A moment later, a bright beam of light shot out from the tunnel. It was Henderson. He stood at the edge of the ledge. He moved his light left and right. The light passed over the vines covering Arthur and Clara. Arthur held his breath. He could see Henderson's face. The manager looked like a monster in the shadows. He was breathing hard. Water ran down his expensive suit. "I know you are here," Henderson shouted. His voice was loud, but it was partly lost in the wind. He walked a few steps onto the ledge. He looked down at the wild ocean. The waves were white and angry. Henderson probably thought they had fallen into the water. He stayed there for a long time. He did not move. He was waiting for a sound or a movement. Arthur felt a sharp rock pressing into his back, but he did not move. Clara was shaking from the cold. Arthur put his arm around her to keep her warm and quiet. They were like two statues in the dark. Finally, Henderson made a sound of frustration. He turned around and walked back into the tunnel. Arthur heard his footsteps fade away, but they did not leave their hiding place. They knew Henderson was a clever man. He might be waiting just inside the door. "Is he gone?" Clara whispered. Her teeth were chattering. "I do not know." Arthur said, "We must wait." He looked at the silver watch in his hand. He then reached into his large coat pocket. Before they ran from the room, he had grabbed a small bundle of papers from the wooden chest. One of them was a small, leather-bound book. "I have the journal," Arthur said. "The papers from the chest. We need to read them. They might tell us where to go next." They were safe for now, but the night was only beginning. The storm continued to scream around them. Arthur knew they had to find a new way back into the hotel or a way down to the beach. They could not stay on the cliff forever. Arthur and Clara waited for 10 minutes in the cold darkness. The only sounds were the wind and the heavy rain. Finally, Arthur turned on his flashlight. He kept the light very low. He opened the small leather-bound book he had taken from the chest. The pages were thin and yellow. The handwriting was very neat. It was the journal of Captain Elias. On the first page, it said, "Property of Elias Vance. To my family. Keep these secrets safe." Arthur turned the pages slowly. He found a drawing of the silver watch. Next to it, there were many numbers and dates. "This is not just a journal," Arthur whispered. "It is a manual. It explains how to use the watch to find the treasure." Clara leaned in to see. "Look at the bottom of the page," she said. There was a drawing of a cave. The cave was shaped like a giant mouth. Inside the drawing, there were several large stones. One stone had a small hole in it. The journal said, "When the watch shows the golden hour, the light of the moon will pass through the stone. It will point to the heart of the ship." "The golden hour," Arthur said. "That is the 10:15 on the watch. But it only works during the low tide of a full moon." Arthur looked at the sky through the vines. The clouds were thick, but he knew the moon was nearly full. "We have the watch, and we have the instructions. But we are still on a cliff." He turned to the last page of the journal. There was a small map of the cliffs. It showed a path that went down from their current position to the hidden beach. The path was called the Sailor's Way. It was hidden behind a large rock shaped like a turtle. "Clara, look," Arthur said, pointing to the map. "There is a way down. We don't have to go back into the hotel. We can go straight to the beach. But the storm is too strong," Clara said. She looked at the wild water below. "The waves will pull us in." Arthur looked at the journal again. He saw a small note at the very end. It said, In the middle of the storm, the cave is the only safe place. The water cannot enter the heart of the mountain. Arthur felt a new sense of hope. The cave is a shelter. If we can reach it, we can wait for the storm to pass. And then, we can find the gold. Suddenly, they heard a sound from the ledge. It was not a boot. It was the sound of a metal tool hitting the rock. Arthur turned off the light. He peered through the vines. He saw a shadow moving near the entrance of the tunnel. It was not Henderson. This person was thinner and moved more quickly. It was Silas. He had a metal bar in his hand, and he was searching the walls. He was looking for the secret compartment where they were hiding. The race was no longer just between Arthur and Henderson. Silas was here, and he was very close. Arthur and Clara sat perfectly still. Silas moved closer to their hiding spot. He used his metal bar to tap the stone walls. The sound was sharp and rhythmic. Arthur's heart raced. He knew that if Silas moved the vines, they would be caught. Suddenly, a large piece of the cliff broke off near the tunnel entrance. It fell into the ocean with a loud splash. The ground shook slightly. Silas stopped. He looked at the edge of the ledge. The wind was getting even stronger, and the rain was turning into a heavy downpour. Silas looked back at the tunnel, then at the dangerous path. He decided that the cliff was too dangerous. He turned and ran back into the hotel. "He is gone," Arthur whispered. "But he will come back. We have to find the sailor's way now." They crawled out of the small hole. The wind almost pushed them over the edge. Arthur used his flashlight to find the rock shaped like a turtle. He saw it about 10 meters down the ledge. It was a large, dark stone that looked exactly like a turtle's shell. "There!" Arthur pointed. They moved carefully. The path was narrow and very slippery. Arthur held Clara's hand tightly. When they reached the turtle rock, they saw a small opening behind it. It was a narrow crack in the stone. It led to a steep set of stairs carved directly into the cliff. These were not stone blocks. They were holes for feet and hands. "I will go first," Arthur said. He climbed down slowly. The salt from the sea made the rocks taste like metal. Below them, the beach was covered in white foam. The waves were huge. After a long and difficult climb, Arthur's feet touched the sand. He helped Clara down. The beach was small and surrounded by high walls of rock. In the middle of the beach, there was a giant opening. It looked like a dark mouth in the mountain. This was the cave from the journal. Arthur looked at the silver watch. It was 9:50 p.m. "We have 25 minutes before the golden hour," he said. The water was hitting the entrance of the cave, but the center was dry. They ran inside. The air inside the cave was warm and quiet. The sound of the storm became a low hum. Arthur shined his light around. The walls of the cave were covered in shiny black crystals. "We are here," Clara said. She sat down on a dry rock. She was exhausted. "But how do we find the heart of the ship?" Arthur looked at the ceiling. He saw a small hole high up in the rock. "We wait for the moon," he said. "If the clouds break, the light will show us the way." The cave was a peaceful place compared to the wild storm outside. Arthur and Clara sat in the darkness, listening to the ocean. The air smelled of salt and old stone. Arthur felt the weight of the silver watch in his right pocket. He felt the journal in his left pocket. He reached into his trousers pocket to touch the gold bird key. His heart stopped. He felt nothing but fabric. Arthur stood up quickly. He patted his pockets. He checked his coat. He checked the floor around him. The pocket was empty. The gold bird key, the key of the sky, was gone. "What is it?" Clara asked. She saw the panic on his face. "The key," Arthur whispered. "The gold key." It is not here. Clara stood up too. Did it fall on the cliff? Or in the tunnel? Arthur tried to remember. He remembered feeling the key when they were in the basement room. He remembered the moment Henderson lunged at them. Then they ran through the narrow tunnel and hid behind the vines. Silas, Arthur said. His voice was full of anger. When we were hiding behind the vines. Silas was tapping the walls with his metal bar. He didn't find us, but maybe, no. He remembered a specific moment. When they were crawling out of the small hole behind the vines. Arthur had brushed against a sharp piece of rock. He had felt a small tug on his coat. He thought it was just the fabric catching on the stone. I think I lost it near the hiding spot. Arthur said. It must have fallen out when I crawled out of the hole. Clara looked at the entrance of the cave. The water was rising. The path back up the Sailor's Way was now covered in dangerous waves. We cannot go back for it now. Arthur. The tide is too high. We are trapped here until the morning. Arthur sat back down. He felt like he had failed. They had the map, the journal, and the watch. But they were missing one of the two keys. The silver key was safe in Clara's bag. But without the gold key, the heart of the ship might stay locked forever. Wait. Clara said. She looked at the silver watch. It was 10:10 p.m. The golden hour is almost here. Maybe the key is not for a lock. Maybe the key is just a symbol. Arthur looked at the journal. He read the words again. The gold belongs to the sea. The heart must beat as one. He realized that the gold key was made of the same metal as the treasure of the Golden Star. Suddenly, the wind changed. The thick clouds above the cave began to move. A small gap appeared in the sky. For the first time that night, the bright, white light of the full moon hit the water outside. Look. Clara pointed to the ceiling. A thin beam of moonlight came through the small hole in the top of the cave. It moved across the black crystals on the wall. It was like a finger of light searching for something. Arthur watched the light. He forgot about the lost key for a moment. The mystery was moving forward, with or without the gold. The beam of moonlight was sharp and silver. It moved slowly across the cave wall, jumping from one black crystal to another. Arthur and Clara watched in silence. The watch in Arthur's hand gave a soft, mechanical click. The hands reached 10:15. At that exact moment, the moonlight hit a large, smooth stone at the back of the cave. The stone was different from the others. It was not black. It was a pale, sandy color. In the center of the stone was a small, circular indentation. The light is pointing right at it. Clara whispered. Arthur approached the stone. He saw that the indentation was the exact size of the silver pocket watch. He looked at the back of the watch. There was a small, raised ridge that matched a groove in the stone. It's a mechanism. Arthur realized. The watch isn't just a timer. It's a handle. He placed the watch into the stone and turned it to the right. He heard a series of heavy, muffled thuds behind the wall. Then, with a sound like grinding teeth, the large stone began to sink into the sandy floor. Behind the stone was a small, dry chamber. Arthur shined his flashlight inside. His breath caught in his throat. This was not a treasure chest or a pile of coins. Resting in the center of the chamber was a small wooden model of a ship, encased in a thick glass bottle. But it was not a normal model. The ship was made entirely of solid gold. The sails were thin sheets of hammered silver, and the tiny lanterns on the deck were made of small, glowing amber. Next to the bottle lay a heavy iron box. The Golden Star. Clara breathed. It wasn't a cargo of gold bars. It was a masterpiece of art. Arthur reached for the glass bottle, but a sudden sound stopped him. It was the sound of a metal bar hitting the stone entrance of the cave. Arthur turned around. Standing in the mouth of the cave, silhouetted against the crashing white waves, was Silas. He was soaked to the bone, his grey coat heavy with water. In his left hand, he held the metal bar. In his right hand, he held something that glinted with a familiar yellow light. "Looking for this, Mr. Arthur?" Silas asked. He held up the gold bird key. Silas walked into the cave, his eyes fixed on the golden ship in the bottle. "I saw you drop it on the ledge. I figured it would lead me to the prize eventually. Henderson is a fool. He thinks in bricks and mortar. But I know the value of a good story." Silas stepped closer, the gold key dangling from his fingers. "Now, move away from the chamber. I've worked too long for this. My grandfather died talking about this ship. I'm not leaving without it." Arthur looked at the iron box next to the bottle. He saw a single keyhole. It was shaped like a bird. He realized the ship in the bottle was just the key to something even bigger inside that box. And Silas had the final piece. The cave felt smaller with Silas standing in the entrance. The roar of the ocean behind him was deafening, but his voice remained sharp and clear. He held the gold bird key between two fingers, moving it just enough to catch the flashlight's beam. "You have the watch, and I have the key," Silas said, his eyes darting to the iron box inside the hidden chamber. "Neither of us can finish this alone. Henderson is likely crawling through the tunnels as we speak. We don't have much time." Arthur looked at Clara. She was pale, but her eyes were fixed on Silas with a look of deep distrust. Arthur looked back at the iron box. It was old, rusted at the edges, but the lock was a masterpiece of Victorian engineering. "Why should we trust you?" Arthur asked. "You broke into my shop. You destroyed years of my work." Silas shrugged, a cold movement of his shoulders. "I did what was necessary to find the desk. I am a collector of secrets, Arthur. Some call it theft. I call it preservation. That ship in the bottle, it's a legend. If Henderson gets it, he'll melt it down to pay the hotel's debts. If I take it, it stays whole. It belongs to the family." Clara spoke up, her voice trembling but firm. "It belongs to the memory of Captain Elias." Silas laughed, a dry sound that was lost in the wind. "Memory doesn't pay for the hunt. But I'll make you a deal. We open the box together. We see what's inside. If it's what I think it is, we share the discovery. If not, well, you can stay here and explain everything to the police when the tide goes down." Arthur weighed his options. Behind Silas, the waves were beginning to spill over the cave's lip. The golden hour was fading. The moonlight was shifting away from the stone. "Fine," Arthur said. "The key. Put it on the stone table." Silas stepped forward carefully. He placed the gold bird key on the flat rock next to the iron box. He then stepped back, keeping his metal bar ready. Arthur reached out, his fingers trembling as he touched the cold, heavy gold. He placed the key into the lock of the iron box. He turned the key. The sound was different this time. Not a grind, but a musical chime. The lid of the iron box popped open. Inside, there were no more ship models. There was a stack of thick, wax-sealed envelopes and a heavy silver compass. Arthur picked up the top envelope. It was addressed to the Maritime Museum of London. "It's not gold," Arthur whispered, skimming the first letter. "It's the logbooks. The evidence." Captain Elias didn't hide treasure. He hid the truth about the Golden Star. The ship wasn't sunk by a storm. It was sunk on purpose for insurance money by the Henderson family's ancestors. Silas froze. His dream of a golden fortune was vanishing. The ship in the bottle. He hissed, pointing at the gold model. "That's still worth a king's ransom." "It's the proof," Clara said, her eyes filling with tears as she read over Arthur's shoulder. The ship model contains the original manifest. This is how he was going to bring them to justice. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the cave entrance. It wasn't Silas, and it wasn't the tide. "I'll take those papers now." A voice boomed. Mr. Henderson stood there, holding a heavy flare gun. He wasn't looking at the gold. He was looking at the letters that could destroy his family's name forever. The cave erupted in a blinding, crimson light. Mr. Henderson had fired the flare gun into the ceiling. The red chemical fire hissed against the wet stone, casting long, dancing shadows that made the cave look like the inside of a beating heart. The smell of sulfur filled the air, choking the scent of the salt sea. "The papers! Arthur!" Henderson screamed over the roar of a massive wave hitting the entrance. "Throw them into the water, or the next one is aimed at you." The water was now swirling around their ankles. The golden hour was over, and the ocean was reclaiming its territory. Silas backed away from the iron box, his eyes darting between the gold ship in the bottle and the desperate man with the flare gun. For the first time, the thief looked genuinely afraid. "You're insane, Henderson!" Silas yelled. "The cave is flooding. If we don't move now, we're all dead." "I don't care." Henderson's face was twisted with a century of family shame. That ship was a crime, and these letters are the executioner. "I won't let a schoolteacher and a failed heiress ruin 100 years of the Henderson name." Arthur looked at the stack of envelopes in his hand. He then looked at the golden ship in the bottle. He realized why Captain Elias had put them together. The ship was the lure, the beautiful, shiny object that would draw people in. But the papers were the anchor. They were the truth that held the weight of history. To whoever finds this, the gold is a ghost. The truth is the only thing that can rest. Let the bay finally sleep. "Arthur, look out!" Clara screamed. A massive surge of seawater rushed into the cave, knocking Henderson off his feet. The flare gun flew from his hand, sputtering out in the cold water. The cave plunged back into darkness, saved only by Arthur's flashlight, which was rolling on the sandy floor. In the chaos, Silas lunged. He didn't go for the papers. He grabbed the glass bottle containing the golden ship. "Every man for himself," he cried, scrambling toward the narrow Sailor's Way exit, even as the waves tried to pull him back. Henderson struggled to stand, his hands reaching blindly for the letters Arthur held. "Give them to me. The water is too high," Arthur shouted, grabbing Clara's arm. "We have to climb." "Henderson, leave the papers. Save yourself." But the manager was beyond reason. He threw himself at Arthur, his fingers clawing for the wax-sealed envelopes. As they struggled, another wave, larger than the last, slammed into the cave. It hit the back wall with the force of a train, the pressure of the air and water combined. Arthur felt his feet leave the ground. He held the papers tight against his chest, his other hand locked onto Clara's wrist. He saw the iron box get swept away into the dark recesses of the mountain. Henderson disappeared beneath a wall of white foam. "Arthur!" The opening. Clara pointed upward. The rising water was lifting them toward the small hole in the ceiling, the same hole the moonlight had shone through. It was their only hope. But the gap was narrow and the current was violent. The water inside the cave rose with terrifying speed. It was no longer a splash. It was a rising tide that filled the cavern like a cup. Arthur and Clara were lifted off their feet, buoyant and spinning in the dark. Arthur tucked the thick stack of envelopes inside his waterproof jacket, zipping it tight against his chest. He could feel the hard edges of the truth pressing against his ribs. "Hold on to me," Arthur shouted, his voice echoing against the stone ceiling that was now only inches from his face. The beam of his flashlight, still clutched in his hand, swept across the churning foam. For a brief second, He saw a hand reach out of the water. Henderson. The manager was gasping, his eyes wide with a mix of terror and obsession. He wasn't reaching for a hand to save him. He was still reaching for Arthur's jacket, his fingers clawing at the air where the papers were hidden. Then, a violent eddy pulled Henderson back into the dark depths of the cave. The hole. Arthur. Right there. Clara gasped, spitting out salt water. The small opening in the ceiling, the eye through which the moon had watched them, was now their only exit. The water pushed them toward it. Arthur felt the rough rock of the ceiling scrape his shoulders. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a person. Go first, Arthur commanded, bracing his feet against the ceiling to push Clara toward the gap. Clara grabbed the edges of the hole. With a strength born of pure adrenaline, she hauled herself upward. The water surged again, a massive pulse from the ocean that slammed Arthur against the rock. He felt the air leave his lungs. For a moment, everything went grey. Then, a hand grabbed his collar. Reach up. Clara's voice sounded far away, coming from above the stone. Arthur reached out blindly. He felt her fingers lock onto his. With one final, desperate kick against the rising water, he pulled himself into the narrow chimney of rock. It was a tight squeeze, the stone scratching his arms and face, but he climbed, fueled by the cold wind blowing down from above. They tumbled out onto the grassy cliff top, collapsing into the mud and rain. They were only 20 meters from the back of the Sea View Hotel. The building stood like a dark, silent tomb against the lightning-streaked sky. Arthur rolled onto his back, gasping for air. The rain washed the salt from his eyes. He reached into his jacket and felt the bundle of envelopes. They were damp, but the wax seals were intact. The secret of the Golden Star had survived the sea. In the distance, down by the churning harbor, a pair of headlights cut through the storm. A dark car was speeding away from the town, its tires splashing through the deep puddles. Silas. Clara whispered, sitting up and hugging her knees. He has the ship. He's gone. He has the gold. Arthur said, his voice ragged. But we have the story. He has a trophy that he can never show the world. We have the truth that will change it. He looked back at the cliff's edge. The cave below was completely submerged now. There was no sign of Mr. Henderson. The guardian of the bay had been claimed by the very secret he had tried to bury. 1 week later, the sun was shining over Brightwood Bay. The great storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the ocean a calm, sparkling blue. The Sea View Hotel was quiet. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze around the front entrance, and the heavy painting of the ship in the lobby had been removed, revealing the dark stone staircase behind it. Arthur stood on the pier, his small suitcase by his side. He looked different than the man who had arrived a few days ago. His coat was stained with salt, and there was a small bandage on his forehead, but his eyes were bright. Clara walked toward him from the town's small post office. She held a newspaper in her hand. The headline read, "History Rewritten. Local teacher reveals truth of the Golden Star." The museum in London called this morning. Clara said, a smile finally reaching her eyes. The curators are in shock. They've verified the signatures on the manifests. The Henderson family's insurance fraud is now a matter of public record. The town is talking about turning the hotel into a historical site. And what about Mr. Henderson? Arthur asked. Clara looked out at the cliffs. The Coast Guard found his flare gun near the beach, but nothing else. He's gone. Arthur. Just like the shadows he tried to keep. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out the small silver watch. He had cleaned it, and the silver now glowed in the morning light. He turned it over in his hand. And Silas. Any word on the black car? The police found it abandoned near the city docks. Clara replied. Empty. Silas is a shadow. He knows how to disappear. He has the golden ship, but he can never sell it. Every collector in the world now knows that the ship is a stolen artifact. It's a beautiful prison for him. Arthur nodded. He looked at the watch one last time and then handed it to Clara. This belongs to you. It's your family's history. Captain Elias would want you to have the heart of the ship. Clara took the watch, her fingers brushing against Arthur's. What will you do now, Arthur? Back to the quiet shop. Back to the old books. Arthur looked at the horizon. He thought about his broken furniture and the dusty shelves of his shop. But he also thought about the thrill of the sailor's way and the secret language of the Victorian desk. I think I might look for a new desk, Arthur said with a small laugh. But this time, I'll check for secret compartments before I buy it. He picked up his suitcase and began to walk toward his car. He was just a teacher and a shopkeeper again. But he carried something more valuable than gold. He carried a story that was finally complete. The mystery of Brightwood Bay was solved, and for the first time in 60 years, the sea was at peace. Arthur drove away from Brightwood Bay with a heavy heart but a clear mind. The long road back to the city felt shorter than the journey there. The familiar landscape of rolling hills and quiet farms passed by like scenes from a movie he had already watched. When he finally pulled onto the narrow street where his shop sat, he felt a sudden pang of anxiety. He parked his car and sat for a moment, looking at the familiar wooden sign, Arthur's Antiquities. The front window was boarded up with rough plywood. The police tape had been removed, but the scars of the break-in were visible. Arthur stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on a few stray shards of glass that the broom had missed. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale and smelled of splintered wood and old dust. Mr. Miller had done his best to tidy up, but the shop was a disaster. The beautiful mahogany tables were scarred, and his collection of rare books lay in piles like wounded birds. Arthur walked slowly toward the back of the room, toward the spot where the Victorian desk had once stood. The floorboards there had been ripped up, leaving a dark, gaping hole that looked like an open grave. He sat down on a stool, the only piece of furniture that hadn't been broken. He felt a deep sense of loss. This shop was his life, his sanctuary. Now, it was a crime scene. As he looked around, he noticed something strange. On his workbench, right in the center, sat a small, brown paper package. It was not there when the police had finished their report. Arthur stood up, his heart beginning to beat fast. He approached the bench. The package was tied with a piece of simple twine. There was no return address and no name. He took a deep breath and carefully cut the string. Inside the paper was a small, black velvet pouch and a handwritten note on heavy, cream-colored stationery. The ship was too heavy for a man on the run. A story is only worth as much as the one who can tell it. We are even for the desk. Arthur's hands shook as he opened the pouch. He tipped the contents onto the workbench. A shower of small, brilliant objects fell out. They were the tiny, glowing amber lanterns from the golden ship's deck. Silas had stripped the ship of its most precious lights, before disappearing into the shadows. Arthur looked at the amber stones. They were ancient and beautiful, holding a warm light even in the dim shop. Silas hadn't given him the gold, but he had given him the means to rebuild his shop. More importantly, it was a message. The game wasn't over. The world of secrets was much larger than one bay in the north. Arthur realized that while the story of the Golden Star was finished, his own journey as a seeker of truth had only just begun. The amber lanterns glowed on Arthur's workbench, casting tiny spots of honey-colored light against the scarred wood. He spent the next 3 days cleaning the shop, his mind constantly drifting back to the cold salt air of Brightwood Bay. He used a portion of the amber's value, sold quietly to a reputable jeweler, to replace the windows and repair the broken floorboards. The shop was beginning to look like a sanctuary again, yet the silence of the room felt different now. It felt like a pause between breaths. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the bell above the door chimed. Arthur didn't look up from a clock he was repairing. "I'm not officially open yet, Mr. Miller," he said, assuming it was his neighbor checking in. "I'm not Mr. Miller, though I appreciate his punctuality." A voice replied. It was a woman's voice, sharp and cultured, with a slight accent Arthur couldn't immediately place. Arthur looked up. Standing by the door was a woman in an elegant charcoal grey coat. She held a black umbrella that dripped onto the freshly polished floor. She was older than Clara, perhaps in her 50s, with silver hair pulled back into a severe bun and eyes the color of flint. She wasn't carrying a suitcase or a shopping bag, but a small leather portfolio. "Can I help you?" Arthur asked, setting down his jeweller's loop. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said, stepping further into the shop. "I believe you've spent some time with my niece, Clara, and my father's journal." Arthur felt a jolt of adrenaline. He stood up straight. "You're Captain Elias's daughter." Eleanor nodded, her expression unreadable. She walked through the shop, her eyes scanning the repaired furniture with an expert gaze. "Clara told me everything that happened at the Sea View Hotel. She believes you are a hero, Mr. Arthur. I, however, am a realist. You uncovered a secret that my family spent decades trying to suppress. You brought the Henderson name to ruin." "It was the truth," Arthur defended. "Your father wanted it known. He left the maps, the watch, the desk. It was a trail for someone to follow." Eleanor stopped in front of a shelf of old maritime books. "He left a trail because he was a romantic. He believed that the truth would set things right. But truth, Mr. Arthur, is like a leak in a hull. It doesn't just sink the guilty, it can drown everyone on board." She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "Silas Vane is still out there, and he isn't the only one who noticed your little excursion to the bay." She opened her portfolio and pulled out a photograph. It was a grainy black and white image of a large, ornate iron key, different from the bird keys. It had a head shaped like an anchor wrapped in thorns. The golden star was carrying more than just a ship model and some incriminating manifests. Eleanor whispered. "There was a second chest, Mr. Arthur, one that my father never found. And according to the letters you recovered, the map for its location isn't in a cave. It's hidden in a collection of books that was sold to a library in this very city 20 years ago." Arthur felt the world tilt. He had thought the story was over, but Eleanor's arrival suggested that Brightwood Bay was only the prologue to a much deeper, more dangerous volume. Arthur stared at the photograph of the anchor-shaped key. The image was old, but the detail of the thorns wrapping around the metal was clear. It looked more like a weapon than a tool for a lock. The shop, which had finally begun to feel quiet and safe again, suddenly felt exposed. The shadows between the wardrobes seemed to stretch, hiding new secrets. "A second chest?" Arthur asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Captain Elias never mentioned another one in his journal. We found the ship model, the logs, the manifests. What could be more important than the proof of the Henderson fraud?" Eleanor Vance stepped closer, the scent of expensive perfume and rain-drenched wool following her. She laid the photograph on the workbench next to the amber lanterns. "My father was a man of layers, Mr. Arthur. He gave the public the truth about the Hendersons because that was a debt of honor. But the Golden Star was carrying something the Crown had kept off the official records. It was a diplomatic gift, a set of astronomical instruments made of platinum and diamond, intended for an observatory that was never built." Arthur's mind raced. Platinum and diamonds. If the golden ship model was a masterpiece of art, these instruments were a fortune of science and wealth. "And you think the map to this second chest is here? In the city?" "I don't think. I know," Eleanor replied. She pointed to the leather portfolio. When the Hendersons realized my father had evidence against them, they raided his house. They couldn't find the Goldbird key, but they seized his library. Most of those books were eventually sold to the City Central Library. Among them was a first edition of the Navigator's Guide to the Northern Stars. My father used to say that the stars never lie, but they can be moved. Arthur looked at the clock on the wall. The City Central Library was only a few blocks away. It was a massive, labyrinthine building, a fortress of paper and ink. If the map is in that book, why hasn't someone found it already? Because you need the key to read the map, Eleanor said, tapping the photograph of the thorny anchor. The map is printed in a transparent ink that only reacts to the magnetic properties of the specific alloy used in that key. Without the key, the pages look perfectly normal. And where is the key? Arthur asked. Eleanor's face went pale. That is the problem. The key was stolen from my father's bedside the night he died. We believe it was taken by a man who worked as his gardener, a man named Silas Vane's father. The connection hit Arthur like a physical blow. The Vane family hadn't just been following the Goldbird. They had been holding the second half of the mystery for a generation. Silas didn't just want the golden ship. He wanted the key's purpose. We have to get to that book before Silas does, Arthur said, reaching for his coat. Eleanor checked her watch. The library closes in 2 hours. Silas is a man of the night, but he is also a man who has been watching you. Mr. Arthur, if we move now, we might have the advantage of surprise. But be warned, the Central Library has many floors, and Silas knows how to move in the dark. The City Central Library loomed over the intersection of 4th and Main like a giant stone sentinel. Its Gothic arches and stained glass windows were darkened by the evening rain, making the building look more like a cathedral than a house of books. Arthur and Eleanor stepped out of the taxi, their breath visible in the chilly air. "Stay close," Eleanor whispered, her flint-grey eyes scanning the shadows of the portico. Silas is not a man who waits for an invitation. If he knows about the book, he's already inside. They entered the great hall. The ceiling soared 50 feet above them, decorated with fading murals of ancient scholars. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and the vanilla-like aroma of decaying paper. It was a familiar smell to Arthur, one that usually brought him peace, but tonight it felt suffocating. They approached the central desk. A librarian with spectacles perched precariously on the end of her nose looked up from a ledger. "May I help you?" she asked, her voice a dry rustle. "We're looking for the special collections," Arthur said, trying to sound like a harmless academic. "Specifically, the 19th century maritime archives. We're researching a first edition of the Navigator's Guide to the Northern Stars." The librarian's eyes narrowed behind her lenses. "You're the third person to ask for that section today. Very popular all of a sudden. It's on the 4th floor, East Wing. But be quick. We close in 40 minutes. Arthur exchanged a look with Eleanor. Third person. They hurried toward the elevators, but Eleanor pulled Arthur toward the stone staircase instead. "The elevators are a trap," she muttered. "In a building like this, you want a way out that doesn't rely on a motor." As they climbed the stairs, the sounds of the city faded, replaced by the heavy silence of millions of sleeping pages. By the time they reached the 4th floor, Arthur's heart was pounding against his ribs. The east wing was a labyrinth of mahogany shelves, the stacks so tall they disappeared into the darkness above. "There." Eleanor pointed toward a locked cage at the far end of the wing. "The rare books vault." They approached the cage. The gate was slightly ajar. Arthur felt a cold shiver. He pushed the gate open. Inside, the shelves were packed with leather-bound volumes, their spines glinting with gold leaf. Arthur searched the end section. His fingers danced over titles of voyages and discoveries. Finally, he saw it, a small, dark blue book with a silver compass embossed on the cover. The Navigator's Guide to the Northern Stars. He pulled it from the shelf. The book felt strangely heavy. He opened the front cover, expecting to see a map. Instead, he saw a hollowed-out square in the center of the pages. The map had been cut out. "We're too late," Arthur whispered, showing the empty book to Eleanor. "Not quite." A voice drifted from the shadows behind them. Silas Vane stepped out from behind a stack of atlases. He wasn't holding a metal bar this time. He was holding a jagged piece of parchment in one hand and the anchor-shaped key in the other. The map is useless without the key, and the key is useless without the map. But together, they tell a very interesting story. Silas Vane stood in the center of the rare books vault, the anchor-shaped key dangling from his fingers. The jagged piece of parchment he held was yellowed and brittle, looking like a piece of skin torn from an ancient giant. Silas didn't look like the confident thief from the cave. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot and his clothes rumpled. The weight of his family's obsession was clearly beginning to crush him. "You're a hard man to lose, Arthur," Silas said, his voice echoing in the hollow space between the bookshelves. "I thought the ocean would have finished you. But you and the Vances, you're like barnacles. Once you latch onto a story, you never let go." Eleanor Vance stepped forward, her face a mask of iron. "The story doesn't belong to you, Silas. It never did. That key was stolen from a dying man. Give it back, and perhaps we can settle this without the police." Silas laughed, a harsh, dry sound. "The police? They're busy looking for Henderson's remains in the bay. No, we're beyond the law now. This is about legacy." He held up the anchor key. "You said it yourself, Eleanor. The map is useless without the magnetic reaction. I've tried every magnet in the city. Nothing works. It needs the specific alloy of this key." He walked toward a heavy reading table in the center of the vault. With a flick of his wrist, he smoothed the parchment out on the wood. He then hovered the anchor key just inches above the paper. Arthur watched, fascinated. At first, nothing happened. Then, the air seemed to hum with a low-frequency vibration. On the surface of the parchment, thousands of tiny, microscopic particles, iron filings suspended in transparent ink, began to move. They danced and swirled like a school of fish, aligning themselves with the magnetic field of the thorny anchor. Slowly, a pattern emerged. It wasn't a drawing of a coast or a building. It was a complex grid of lines and numbers, overlaid with the symbols of the zodiac. In the center of the grid, a single point glowed with a faint, ghostly luminescence. The celestial coordinates. Arthur whispered. "It's not a map of the city. It's a map of the sky, reflected onto the city's grid from 80 years ago. The old observatory." Eleanor realized, her voice trembling. "The one that was closed during the war. It's located on the highest hill in the North District. My father always said the stars were the only things he could trust." Silas stared at the glowing point. The North District. That's where the private estates used to be. The observatory is a ruin now, surrounded by a construction site. He looked at Arthur. "You have the intuition, Arthur. You found the desk's secret. You found the cave. I need you to find the vault inside that ruin." "And if I refuse?" Arthur asked. Silas reached into his coat and pulled out a small, heavy object. It wasn't a metal bar this time. It was a black, snub-nosed revolver. Then the story ends here, in the basement of a library, and the stars will keep their secrets forever. The library felt like a tomb as Silas ushered them toward the back service exit. The revolver remained hidden beneath the fold of his grey coat, but Arthur could feel the weight of its presence. They moved through narrow corridors lined with janitorial supplies and old newspapers, emerging into a dark alleyway where the rain had turned into a fine, freezing mist. Silas's car, a black sedan that looked like a bruised shadow, idled near a dumpster. "You drive, Arthur," Silas commanded, tossing the keys. "Eleanor, you sit in the back with me. And don't think about the door handles, they're disabled." Arthur took the wheel. His hands felt cold, but his mind was sharp. As he navigated the car through the winding streets of the city, he watched Silas in the rearview mirror. The thief was staring at the anchor key, turning it over and over. He looked like a man possessed by a ghost. The North District was once the crown jewel of this city, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the gun inches from her side. "Now it's a graveyard of old money and failed dreams. The observatory was my father's favorite place. He used to say that if you look at the stars long enough, you realize how small the Hendersons really are." They began the steep climb up High Watch Hill. The streetlights grew sparse, replaced by the skeletons of half-finished luxury apartments. The construction site was a mess of mud and rusted cranes. At the very top of the hill, sitting like a cracked crown, was the old observatory. It was a beautiful, tragic building. Its stone walls were covered in ivy that had turned black in the winter chill. The great dome, once copper-bright, was now a dull, verdigris green, with several glass panels missing like missing teeth. Arthur parked the car at the edge of the construction fence. "We're here," he said. "Get the flashlight from the glove box," Silas ordered. "And the map. If those coordinates are right, the entrance isn't through the front door. My father's notes mentioned a solar passage that only opens when the alignment is correct." They stepped out into the mud. The wind howled through the scaffolding of the nearby construction, making a sound like a distant flute. Arthur shined the light on the base of the observatory. The magnetic map had shown a point that corresponded to the building's foundation, specifically near the western wing. As they walked, Arthur noticed something. The anchor key in Silas's hand was vibrating again. It wasn't a mechanical vibration. It was a rhythmic hum that seemed to sync with the pulse of the building itself. "Wait," Arthur said, stopping near a stone carving of a sunburst on the wall. The coordinates weren't just for a location. They were for a time. "Look at the shadows." Even in the dim light of the city's distant glow, the moon, now high and pale, cast a long shadow from a nearby crane. The shadow pointed directly at the center of the stone sunburst. "The sunburst is a lock," Arthur realized. "And the anchor is the hand of the clock." Arthur stepped toward the stone sunburst, his flashlight beam trembling against the weathered granite. The carving was intricate. The rays of the sun were not straight lines but curved, asymmetrical arcs that seemed to suggest movement. He looked closely at the anchor key. The thorns that wrapped around the metal weren't just decorative flourishes. They were precisely spaced pins, varying in length and angle. "It's a celestial tumbler," Arthur explained, his voice low and steady. "The anchor represents the fixed earth, and the thorns are the stars in a specific alignment. It's a three-dimensional puzzle." Silas handed the key to Arthur, his revolver never wavering. "Fix it, Arthur. My patience is as thin as this mountain air. If you try to jam the lock, Eleanor pays the price for your clumsiness." Arthur took the key. It felt strangely warm, almost as if the metal possessed a faint, internal heartbeat. He carefully inserted the tip into the circular hole at the center of the sunburst. It slid in with a precision that was terrifying for an 80-year-old mechanism. He didn't just push. He felt the internal resistance, rotating the key slowly to match the moon's current position as indicated by the shadow of the crane. The ground beneath their feet began to hum. It wasn't the violent shaking of a machine, but the smooth, deep resonance of massive lead weights being released. The sunburst carving began to rotate, the stone grinding with a sound like a low, satisfied growl. Slowly, a section of the foundation, hidden behind a curtain of thick, frozen ivy, began to recede. It didn't swing open like a door. It sank into the earth, revealing a narrow, spiraling staircase that descended into the dark heart of the hill. The solar passage, Eleanor whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. My father called it the reflector room. He said it was where the stars were brought down to earth. Move, Silas commanded, gesturing toward the opening. I didn't spend a decade chasing ghosts to stop at the front porch. They descended. The air grew warmer as they went deeper, losing its winter chill and taking on a dry, metallic scent, the smell of old grease and polished brass. The walls of the staircase were lined with mirrors, each one angled to catch the faint light from the moon above and funnel it downward. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a vast, circular chamber. In the center stood a massive telescope, but its lens was not pointed at the sky. Instead, the entire apparatus was inverted, its massive eye focused on a large, silver-lined pit in the center of the floor. This isn't an observatory, Arthur realized, shining his light into the pit. It's a vault. At the bottom of the pit, resting on a pedestal of black marble, was the second iron chest. This one was far more ornate than the one they had found in the sea cave. It was bound in bands of shimmering platinum, and its lid was decorated with a map of the heavens made entirely of glittering diamonds. The diplomatic gift. Silas breathed, his greed finally overriding his caution. He stepped toward the edge of the pit, his eyes fixed on the diamonds. But as his boot touched the silver-lined rim, a sharp, metallic snap echoed through the room. The mirrors on the walls began to shift in unison, their reflections crossing and recrossing until the chamber was transformed into a blinding, disorienting maze of light. The chamber was no longer a room. It was a kaleidoscope of blinding white light. Every surface, the silver pit, the mirrored walls, even the glass of the inverted telescope, caught the moonlight from above and amplified it 1,000 times. Silas cried out, shielding his eyes with his arm. The revolver in his hand wavered, his sense of direction completely shattered by the optical chaos. I can't see, Silas roared, his voice bouncing off the glass surfaces like a trapped bird. Arthur, turn it off. Stop the mirrors. Arthur dropped to his knees, keeping his eyes fixed on the floor. He knew that in a room of reflections, the only truth was the ground beneath his feet. The floor was made of dark, non-reflective basalt, etched with thin, golden lines that looked like a circuit board. Don't move, Silas, Eleanor warned, her voice surprisingly calm. My father designed this. It's called a refraction maze. If you step on the wrong tile while the light is active, the weight triggers the floor to drop. You'll fall into the lower gears of the observatory. Arthur crawled toward the center, squinting through his fingers. He noticed that the beams of light weren't random. They were converging on the platinum chest, but they were also passing through a series of crystal prisms mounted on the marble pedestal. It's an alarm system, Arthur realized. The light isn't just for defense. It's a power source. The heat from the concentrated moonlight is expanding a mercury switch inside the pedestal. If it gets too hot, the chest will be lowered into a vat of acid in the foundation. We have to block the light. With what? Silas screamed, still blinded. Everything here is glass. Arthur looked at his heavy wool coat. It was dark, thick, and salt-stained. He looked at Eleanor's charcoal-grey wrap. The clothes. We need to cover the main prisms. Arthur stood up, moving by instinct along the golden lines on the floor. The light was so intense he could feel the heat on his skin. He reached the pedestal and threw his coat over the largest prism. Immediately, a section of the room went dark. The high-pitched hum of the machinery began to drop in frequency. Eleanor, the second prism. Near the telescope base. Eleanor moved with graceful precision, stripping off her wrap and draping it over the glass. The blinding glare subsided into a soft, golden glow. The mirrors stopped shifting. The room became quiet again, save for the heavy breathing of the three people inside. Silas lowered his arm, his eyes red and watering. He looked at the chest, then at Arthur. The greed was still there, but it was now tempered by a cold realization. He couldn't survive this place without Arthur's mind. The platinum. Silas whispered, stepping toward the pedestal. He reached out to touch the lid, where the diamond stars twinkled like real constellations. It's beautiful. More beautiful than the ship. Don't touch the diamonds, Silas. Arthur warned, his voice sharp. They aren't just decorations. Look at the patterns. They're the same symbols from the navigator's guide. They are buttons. If you press them in the wrong order, the solar passage will become your tomb. The air in the circular chamber was still, save for the rhythmic, metallic ticking of the cooling mercury switch. Silas stood frozen, his hand hovering inches above the diamond-encrusted lid. The diamonds weren't just stones. They were tiny, multifaceted lenses, each one set into a delicate silver track. Under the soft, golden glow of the partially covered prisms, they looked like a fragment of the night sky fallen into a box. Move back, Silas. Arthur commanded, his voice echoing with a newfound authority. You wanted a treasure hunter, but you found an antiquarian. These stones aren't meant to be pried out. They are the tumblers of the most complex lock I've ever seen. Silas growled, but he stepped back, the revolver shaking slightly. Then open it. Arthur. My father spent his life dreaming of this vault. I won't have it end because you're afraid of a few shiny pebbles. Arthur looked at the lid. There were exactly 7 larger diamonds arranged in a familiar pattern. He recognized the shape immediately. Ursa Major, the Great Bear. But as he looked closer at the smaller diamonds, he realized they formed the rest of the circumpolar constellations. The navigator's guide said the stars can be moved. Arthur whispered to Eleanor. In 1840, when this chest was commissioned, the magnetic north was slightly different than it is today. To open this, we have to adjust the stars to match the sky as it was on the night the Golden Star sailed. He reached out, his fingers light and precise. He didn't press down. He slid the diamonds. They moved with a silk-like smoothness along their silver tracks. He shifted the pointer stars toward a larger, central diamond, the North Star. Wait, Eleanor said, pointing to a small, dark sapphire set near the edge of the lid. That represents the moon. On the night the ship sailed, it was a waning crescent. You need to move the moon to the 12th house. Arthur adjusted the sapphire. As he moved the final stone into place, a sound like a distant choir began to rise from inside the chest. It was the sound of dozens of tiny silver bells, each one tuned to a different note. The music was the sound of the internal pins aligning. The platinum bands around the chest didn't just unlock, they uncoiled like snakes. The lid didn't swing open. It split down the middle and slid into the sides of the pedestal. Inside, resting on a bed of black velvet, were the platinum instruments. There was a sextant made of iridescent metal, a telescope with lenses of pure crystal, and a strange, spherical device that seemed to hold a miniature, rotating model of the galaxy. They were beautiful, but they were also instruments of absolute precision. My God! Eleanor breathed. They're intact. Silas lunged forward, his eyes wild. He reached for the sextant, but as he did, his foot slipped off the golden safety line on the basalt floor. He stepped directly onto a plain, grey tile. A sharp, mechanical clank echoed through the vault. The mirrors on the walls didn't just shift, They retracted. The heavy stone door they had entered through began to slide shut with terrifying speed. The final failsafe. Arthur shouted, "Silas, get back!" But Silas wasn't listening. He had his hands on the platinum, and in his desperation, he had forgotten the most important rule of the vault. The stars never lie, but they always watch. The stone door moved with the weight of a mountain. It wasn't a sudden slam, but a slow, inevitable crawl that shook the very foundations of High Watch Hill. The solar passage was being sealed, triggered by Silas's reckless step. The sound of grinding granite was deafening, a low-frequency vibration that rattled Arthur's teeth and made the silver-lined pit hum like a tuning fork. Silas stood frozen for a heartbeat. The platinum sextant clutched to his chest. It was heavy, far heavier than its size suggested, and his greed seemed to have anchored him to the marble pedestal. "The door!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a mixture of triumph and terror. "Arthur, stop the door!" Arthur looked at the closing gap. They had perhaps 30 seconds before the stone met the frame. Once shut, the vault would become an airtight tomb, hidden beneath layers of city history. The mirrors had vanished into the slots in the walls, leaving the room illuminated only by the frantic beam of Arthur's fallen flashlight and the eerie, fading glow of the crystals. "Eleanor, run!" Arthur yelled, grabbing her arm. But Eleanor wasn't looking at the door. She was staring at the platinum chest. "Arthur, the spherical model. My father's notes. They weren't just about the value of the platinum. The galaxy sphere contains the microfilm for the 1840 Maritime Treaty. It's the only copy left in existence. The treaty. The true secret of the Golden Star. It wasn't just about insurance fraud or a diplomatic gift. It was about a document that held the power to redraw the maritime borders of the Northern Territories. Arthur realized then that the entire vault was a shell for a far more significant political secret. The diamonds and platinum were the bait. The sphere was the prize. Arthur lunged for the pedestal. Silas, thinking Arthur was coming for the sextant, swung the heavy instrument like a club. Arthur ducked, the platinum whistling inches above his head with a lethal weight. He ignored the thief and reached for the rotating sphere. His fingers touched the cold, polished metal. He twisted it hard, feeling the internal gears click, and the device came free from its black marble housing. "I have it!" Arthur cried. The door was now 3/4 closed. The grinding of stone on stone was so loud it felt like it was vibrating inside their skulls. The dust from the ceiling began to fall like grey snow. "Silas, drop it and run," Arthur urged one last time, his voice barely audible over the mechanical roar. "The treasure isn't worth your life." Silas looked at the sextant, then at the narrowing crack of light that led to the stairs. The madness in his eyes flickered, replaced briefly by a cold, calculating survival instinct. But then he looked back at the diamond-encrusted chest, still bolted to the pedestal. "I'm not leaving the rest," he bellowed, throwing himself at the iron box as if he could lift the earth itself. "Arthur, now!" Eleanor pulled at his jacket. They sprinted across the basalt floor, avoiding the golden lines that were now glowing a warning, pulsating red. They reached the stairs just as the opening narrowed to barely a foot wide. Arthur shoved Eleanor through the gap first. She scrambled onto the spiraling stairs, her fingers catching on the rough rock. Arthur threw himself sideways, sliding through the closing crack. The rough granite scraped his ribs, tearing his shirt and drawing blood, but he rolled onto the landing just as the door met the wall. A thunderous boom echoed through the staircase, followed by a final, sharp click of a lock that hadn't been turned in a century. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet. Arthur looked at the sealed stone. There was no sound from the other side. No shouting, no banging. Just the cold, indifferent weight of the hill. Silas Vane was gone, trapped in the lightless, airless vault with the treasure he had spent a lifetime chasing. "Arthur!" Eleanor's voice was a whisper in the dark staircase. "Are you all right?" Arthur sat up, gasping for air, his hand still clutched around the small, heavy ball of platinum. It glinted in the light of his flashlight, a tiny universe of secrets. "I have it. Eleanor. We have the truth." The silence in the spiral staircase was so thick it felt physical. Arthur sat on the cold stone landing, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. His ribs burned where the granite door had grazed him, but he didn't let go of the platinum sphere. It felt unnaturally heavy for its size, as if the secrets it contained had their own physical mass. Beside him, Eleanor Vance was a silhouette against the dim light reflected from the mirrors above. "He didn't come out," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Silas, he stayed for the gold." Arthur looked at the sealed stone door. There was no handle, no keyhole, and no way to trigger the mechanism from this side. The solar passage had functioned exactly as Captain Elias had intended, a perfect, final trap for those who valued wealth over wisdom. He made his choice, Eleanor. He had the chance to run, but he couldn't leave the platinum behind. The vault didn't kill him, his own reflection did. They began the long climb back up the stairs. Every step was a struggle. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape was fading, leaving a bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. As they climbed, the temperature dropped, the metallic scent of the vault replaced by the crisp, damp smell of the city night. When they finally emerged from the base of the observatory, the moon was low in the sky, and the first hints of a grey dawn were touching the horizon. They sat in the car for a long time, the engine idling to provide a small bit of warmth. Arthur held the sphere up to the dashboard light. It was a marvel of craftsmanship. The surface was engraved with a map of the globe as it appeared in the 19th century. But certain lines, the maritime borders, were inlaid with a dark, iridescent metal that seemed to shift color as he turned the object. "This is the heart of it," Arthur said, his voice raspy. "Not the gold ship. Not the diamonds. This treaty. My father called it the Silent Accord," Eleanor said, her eyes fixed on the sphere. "It was a secret agreement between the major powers of the North. It established the rights to the deep water channels that never freeze. If that microfilm proves the Henderson family helped sink the Golden Star to hide a breach of that treaty, it won't just ruin a family name. It will change the international law of the seas." Arthur looked out at the ruins of the observatory. The cranes of the construction site looked like giant insects in the morning light. Silas's father knew. That's why he stole the key. He didn't just want the money. He wanted the leverage. The Vanes were never just thieves. They were blackmailers waiting for the right moment. "And now the moment is ours," Eleanor said. She reached out and touched the sphere. "But we can't take this to the police, Arthur. Not yet. The Hendersons still have friends in high places, even with the patriarch gone. We need a neutral ground. We need to see what's on that film." Arthur put the car in gear. "I know a place. My shop has the equipment for old microdisplays. It's early. The streets will be empty. We'll go there." As they drove down High Watch Hill, Arthur felt a strange sense of irony. He had started this journey looking for a secret compartment in a desk, and now he was carrying a document that could spark a diplomatic crisis. The quiet life of an antiquarian was officially over. The city was still bathed in the blue, hazy light of dawn when Arthur pulled the car up to the curb in front of his shop. The open sign was flipped to closed, and the plywood on the windows looked particularly bleak in the morning light. They hurried inside, the bell chiming with a lonely sound. Arthur didn't stop in the main showroom. He led Eleanor directly to the back, through a heavy velvet curtain into his private restoration lab. The lab was a sanctuary of precision. Tables were covered in jeweller's loupes, fine-tipped brushes, and glass vats of cleaning solvents. In the corner sat a rare piece of equipment, a modified Victorian microprojector, an ancestor of the modern microfilm reader, which Arthur used to examine the tiny signatures on 19th-century documents. "We need to be extremely careful," Arthur whispered, placing the platinum sphere on a felt-covered stand. "If this film has been sealed in a vacuum for 80 years, the sudden exposure to oxygen could make it brittle. It might crumble before we can even read it." He put on a pair of white silk gloves. Using a set of fine pliers, he examined the poles of the sphere. There was a tiny, recessed screw hidden beneath the engraving of the Southern Cross. He turned it 0.5 millimeter at a time. With a soft escaping air, the sphere split into 2 perfect hemispheres. Inside was a spool of dark, shimmering material, not plastic, but a thin ribbon of silver nitrate film, a precursor to modern photography. It was wound around a core of solid ivory. "It's a Stanhope's ribbon," Arthur noted, his eyes wide. "Designed to be read through a magnifying lens. It's remarkably well preserved." He carefully threaded the ribbon into the microprojector. The machine hummed as he turned on the lamp. A beam of concentrated yellow light shot through the film, projecting a grainy, oversized image onto the whitewashed wall of the lab. The first frame was a map. It didn't look like the ones they had seen before. It showed the Arctic Circle, but the lines were drawn in a way that suggested hidden underwater ridges, territories that were officially international waters but were marked here as private Henderson holdings. "Keep scrolling," Eleanor urged, her hand gripping the edge of the table. The next frame was a letter. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. It was signed by Lord Archibald Henderson, dated July 14, 1840. Arthur read the words aloud, his voice trembling. "The Golden Star carries more than the Accord. It carries the proof of our pact with the East. If the ship reaches London, the treaty is void and the Henderson name is forfeit. The captain knows too much. The sea must take the evidence." The pact with the East. Eleanor breathed. They weren't just sinking a ship for insurance. They were selling the Northern Passage to a foreign empire. The Hendersons were traitors. Arthur stared at the wall. The projection showed a list of coordinates, not just for the Golden Star, but for 3 other ghost ships that had supposedly been lost in the same decade. The Henderson family hadn't just built a hotel. They had built a dynasty on the bodies of sailors and the theft of a nation's borders. "This is the end of it," Arthur said, turning off the projector. The room plunged back into the dim morning light. "This is the proof Silas wanted. Not to save the world, but to hold the world hostage." Suddenly, the front door bell chimed. Arthur and Eleanor froze. It was too early for Mr. Miller. The sound of heavy, measured footsteps echoed through the shop, moving toward the velvet curtain. The footsteps stopped just outside the velvet curtain. Arthur reached for a heavy brass paperweight on his desk, his fingers trembling. Eleanor stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the shadow moving against the fabric. The curtain was pulled aside, but it wasn't a thug or a thief who stepped into the lab. It was a man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He looked more like a bank manager than a villain, but his eyes were as cold and sharp as the platinum in Arthur's hand. Behind him stood 2 men in dark coats, their expressions as blank as stone. "Mr. Arthur, Miss Vance," the man said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "My name is Inspector Julian Thorne. I represent a specific department of the Ministry of Maritime Affairs, one that has been waiting quite a long time for that sphere to resurface." "Ministry?" Eleanor challenged, her chin tilting upward. "My father was a captain for that ministry. They ignored his reports for 40 years. Why should we believe you're here to help now?" Thorne stepped into the room, his gaze landing on the microprojector. The grainy image of the Henderson letter was still visible on the wall. A small, tight smile touched his lips. "I'm not here to help, Miss Vance. I'm here to collect." The silent accord is a matter of national security. Its contents are not for public consumption, nor are they for the eyes of an antiquarian and a disgruntled relative. National security. Arthur interjected. This letter proves the Henderson family committed treason. It proves they sold out the northern passages. The public has a right to know why those ships were sunk. The public has a right to a stable economy and peaceful borders. Thorne replied, clicking open his briefcase. The revelation of this treaty would restart a territorial war that was settled in shadows nearly a century ago. You've done a remarkable job, Mr. Arthur. You found what the best agents in the Crown couldn't. But the game ends here. Thorne held out a gloved hand. The sphere, please. And the film. Arthur looked at the projector. He realized that Thorne wasn't just here to hide the Hendersons' crimes. He was here to preserve the very power structure the treaty had created. If Arthur handed it over, the truth would be buried forever, this time in a government vault instead of a stone observatory. The shop is surrounded. Thorne added, as if reading Arthur's thoughts. There is no sailor's way here. No secret tunnels. Just a very old shop with a very fragile inventory. Arthur glanced at Eleanor. She gave a microscopic nod toward the back of the lab, where a small service elevator, used for moving heavy furniture between floors, was hidden behind a false wardrobe. I spent my life preserving history, Inspector, Arthur said, his voice gaining strength. I don't think I can let you erase it. In one swift motion, Arthur grabbed a bottle of high-proof cleaning solvent from the workbench and dashed it against the hot lamp of the microprojector. A brilliant flash of white light and a cloud of acrid smoke filled the small lab. Thorne's men lunged forward, but they were blinded by the sudden flare. Arthur grabbed the two halves of the platinum sphere and pulled Eleanor toward the wardrobe. The smoke from the projector was thick and tasted of bitter chemicals. It swirled in the small lab, turning the beam of the morning sun into a solid wall of grey. Arthur heard Thorne coughing, followed by the sharp, metallic sound of a holster being snapped open. There was no time to think. He shoved Eleanor into the false wardrobe, his hands fumbling for the hidden catch on the back panel. Find the pulley, Arthur hissed, his eyes stinging from the fumes. They tumbled into the narrow, dark shaft of the service elevator. It was a relic from the building's days as a textile warehouse, a simple wooden platform operated by a system of heavy iron counterweights. Arthur grabbed the thick, greasy rope and pulled with everything he had. The platform groaned, then lurched upward just as a heavy boot slammed against the wardrobe door behind them. They're in the lift, a voice shouted from below. A muffled gunshot echoed in the confined space, the bullets splintering the floorboards of the platform. Keep pulling, Arthur, Eleanor urged, her hands joining his on the rope. They rose past the second floor, the storage area for unsold chairs and broken clocks, and reached the attic. The attic was a graveyard of history, filled with the skeletons of Victorian bicycles and stacks of water-damaged paintings. Arthur kicked open the elevator gate and they scrambled out, the platform swaying violently behind them. The roof, Arthur said, pointing to a small skylight. It's the only way. Thorne's men are at the front and back doors. He climbed a rolling library ladder and pushed the glass pane open. The cold morning air hit his face like a slap. They scrambled onto the sloped tin roof of the shop. The city was waking up. The distant hum of traffic and the whistle of a train provided a backdrop to their desperate escape. Below them, in the alleyway, two black sedans were parked, their engines idling like hungry beasts. We can't just jump, Eleanor said, looking at the four-story drop. Arthur, the sphere, if we fall, it's lost anyway. Arthur looked across the narrow gap to the neighboring building. Mr. Miller's shop. The two buildings were separated by a 3-foot alley, but the roof lines were uneven. We don't jump down. We jump across. Miller's roof has a fire escape that leads to the next street over. He took the 2 hemispheres of the platinum sphere and tucked them into his deep coat pockets, balance being more important than ever. He looked at Eleanor. She didn't look like a socialite or a grieving niece. She looked like a woman who had waited 50 years for this moment. She nodded once. Arthur leaped first. His boots hit the gravel of Miller's roof with a jarring impact that sent a spike of pain through his shins. He turned and caught Eleanor's hands as she followed, pulling her onto the level surface just as the skylight of his own shop shattered. Inspector Thorne stepped out onto the tin roof, his charcoal suit stark against the grey sky. He didn't run. He simply stood there, watching them. He raised a small radio to his lips. Target is on the adjacent roof. Sector 4, move in. And remember, the sphere must remain intact. The people are secondary. He's not going to stop. Arthur realized, backing away toward the fire escape. He doesn't care about the law. He only cares about the silence. The fire escape of Miller's shop was a rusted iron skeleton that shivered under their weight as they descended. Arthur and Eleanor moved with frantic precision, their footfalls clanging like a dissonant bell through the narrow alleyway. Below, the city was coming to life, oblivious to the high-stakes pursuit occurring above the cobblestones. When they hit the pavement of the side street, Arthur didn't head for his car. "The car is tagged," he said, pulling Eleanor toward a narrow passage that led toward the old town square. "Thorne will have the plate number. We need to get somewhere with the crowd, somewhere he can't fire a weapon without starting a scandal." "The Museum of Industrial History," Eleanor suggested, pointing toward a grand stone building at the end of the block. "It's opening its doors for the early tour. It's full of scholars and tourists. Thorne's department hates witnesses." They sprinted across the square. The museum's heavy brass doors were just being unlocked. They slipped inside, blending into a group of students in thick sweaters. The interior was a forest of iron and brass, massive steam engines, early locomotives, and intricate weaving looms. It was a place where history was measured in gears and pistons. Arthur led them deep into the horology gallery, a room filled with hundreds of ticking clocks. The sound was overwhelming, a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that seemed to pulse in time with the platinum sphere in Arthur's pocket. "Give me the sphere," Eleanor whispered as they ducked behind a massive turret clock from the 1700s. Arthur handed her the hemispheres. "What are you doing?" "The microfilm is silver nitrate," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "If I can find a darkroom or even a chemicals display, I can fix the image. But we need a distraction." Suddenly, the museum doors at the far end of the hall swung open. Inspector Thorne entered alone. He looked calm, his hands clasped behind his back, but the way the light caught his eyes suggested he was a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "Mr. Arthur." Thorne's voice carried easily over the ticking clocks. "This museum is a fitting place for you. You are a man of the past. But the past is a heavy thing to carry. It breaks the backs of those who refuse to let it go." Arthur stepped out from behind the turret clock, his hands visible. Eleanor remained hidden in the shadows of the machinery. "The past belongs to everyone, Thorne. Not just the people who can afford to hide it in a vault." Thorne stopped 10 paces away. "The treaty in that sphere is a ghost. If you release it, you don't bring justice, you bring chaos. You disturb the peace of nations for the sake of a dead captain's grudge." "It's not a grudge," Arthur said, reaching into his other pocket. He didn't pull out the sphere. He pulled out the silver pocket watch he had kept from the bay. "It's a debt. And the time is up." Arthur didn't attack. Instead, he reached into the back of the massive turret clock and jammed the watch into the primary escapement wheel. The watch, built by the same master who designed the clock, fit perfectly. The massive clockwork mechanism, designed to ring a 10-ton bell every hour, was suddenly triggered into a high-speed malfunction. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of striking hammers and spinning gears. The entire gallery began to shake. "Now, Eleanor!" Arthur yelled. The horology gallery was a storm of sound. The massive turret clock, forced into a mechanical frenzy by the silver watch, shook the floorboards. Hammers meant to strike once an hour were now a blur of brass, clanging against bells in a deafening, rhythmic roar. The noise was a physical wall, disorienting and powerful. Inspector Thorne stumbled, his composure finally breaking as he realized the museum piece was now a weapon. Eleanor didn't run for a darkroom. She ran for the great projector in the center of the industrial hall, a massive early cinema apparatus used for public lectures. She knew that in the age of information, a secret's only true protection was its invisibility. Once seen by many, it could never be unseen. "Stop her!" Thorne screamed, but his voice was swallowed by the chimes. Arthur threw himself into Thorne's path, not with a punch, but with a tackle that sent both men sprawling onto the cold marble floor. They rolled past the vibrating gears of a steam engine. Arthur wasn't a fighter, but he was a man who had spent his life protecting fragile things. He held onto Thorne's coat, anchoring him as Eleanor reached the projector. Eleanor jammed the silver nitrate film into the projector's feed. She didn't need a darkroom. The film was hardy enough for one final showing. She cranked the handle with a desperate strength. A beam of brilliant, white light cut through the dust of the museum. On the massive, 4-story-high wall of the main hall, the image appeared. It wasn't just a letter anymore. It was a giant, undeniable ghost. The school children stopped. The tourists looked up. The museum curators froze. The words of Lord Archibald Henderson, admitting to the sinking of the Golden Star and the betrayal of the Northern Passages, were projected in letters 10 feet tall. Below the text, the secret map of the Silent Accord stretched across the stones, showing the stolen territories in vivid detail. Thorne stopped struggling. He looked up at the wall, his face pale in the reflected glow of his own failure. The secret was out. It wasn't in a shop or a vault or a private file. It was in the eyes of 100 witnesses, and in the camera flashes of the journalists who had been attending a morning press conference in the next room. "It's over, Thorne," Arthur panted, releasing the man's lapels. "The truth doesn't need a vault. It just needs a light." 2 months later, Arthur sat on the porch of a small cottage overlooking Brightwood Bay. The shop in the city was closed for the season, undergoing a full renovation funded by a historical preservation grant. The Henderson affair had dominated the news for weeks, leading to a complete restructuring of maritime law and the recovery of the ghost ships Arthur had discovered on the film. Clara stood beside him, holding a tray of tea. She looked healthier. The shadow of her family's tragedy finally lifted. "The museum in London is calling the platinum instruments the find of the century," she said. "They want you to be the head curator of the new Elias Vance wing." Arthur smiled, looking out at the calm, blue water. "I think I'd prefer to just stay an antiquarian, Clara. I've had enough of finds of the century for a while." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, gold bird key. It was the only piece of the treasure he had kept, the one Silas had dropped in the cave. It was a reminder that while gold can be lost and secrets can be buried, the truth always finds a way to the surface. "What about the sphere?" Clara asked. "In a museum vault," Arthur said. "But this time, the vault has a glass door. Anyone can see it. Anyone can read the story." As the sun began to set over the bay, painting the waves in shades of orange and gold, Arthur finally felt the weight of the last few months lift. He picked up a book from the table, not a map or a journal, but a simple novel. The mystery was solved. The heart of the ship was at rest. The Golden Star was no longer a ghost. It was a star that had finally guided them home.